The buzz of my phone on the cheap particle board desk was a sound I'd come to dread. It was late. I'd just finished a double shift at the diner, and the smell of stale coffee and fried food still clung to my clothes. I glanced at the screen. Mark. Of course. My stomach tightened. I'm Jasmine, by the way, and for what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 5 years, I'd been the unofficial, unwilling, but always there in a pinch ATM for my older brother, Mark, and his wife, Gwendolyn. I let it ring a few more times, staring at my own pathetic excuse for a dinner. Instant noodles again. My own bills were stacked neatly on the corner of the desk, a colorful collection of final demands and friendly reminders that my paycheck, stretched thin as it was, barely covered my own life, let alone anyone else's. But the thought of mom and dad, gone too soon, always whispered in the back of my mind. Family looks after family, Jasmine, no matter what. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, I picked up. Hey, Mark, what's up? I tried to sound casual, like I wasn't already bracing myself. Jazz, thank God you answered. His voice was a carefully crafted blend of panic and desperation, a performance I knew all too well. We're in deep, sis. Real deep this time. I closed my eyes. Here we go. What kind of deep, Mark? The landlord, he's threatening eviction, Jazz. Swear to God. We're a few days late on rent, and he's being a total hard ass. Gwendolyn's a wreck. We've got nothing. Literally nothing. We haven't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. I could almost hear Gwendolyn sniffling theatrically in the background. It was always a tag team effort. Mark would lay the groundwork of impending doom, and Gwendolyn would provide the tearful, emotional backup. 2 days, Mark? What about the money I sent you 2 weeks ago for groceries? I tried to keep the edge out of my voice, but it was hard. That had been my treat myself to a new pair of work shoes because these have holes money. Gone, Jazz. It vanished. You know how it is. An unexpected bill, the car needed a tiny repair, just little things. But they add up. We've been trying, really trying to find work, but it's brutal out there. Trying. Right. Mark hadn't held down a steady job for more than a few months since he'd married Gwendolyn. She apparently was too delicate for the rigors of employment, preferring to cultivate her online presence as an aspiring influencer, which mostly seemed to involve taking selfies and complaining about how hard life was. I I don't know, Mark, I said, my gaze falling on my own overdue electricity bill. Things are really tight for me, too. I just worked 16 hours. Please, Jas. Gwendolyn's voice suddenly cut in, laced with a sob that sounded suspiciously practiced. We're desperate. We have nowhere else to turn. You're our only hope. We'll pay you back every penny, I swear, as soon as Mark's big break comes through. His big break was another recurring character in their drama, always just around the corner, never actually arriving. My parents had always bailed Mark out, always believed his stories. After they passed, that responsibility, that crushing weight of expectation, had somehow transferred squarely onto my shoulders. I was younger, but I was the sensible one, the one with the steady, if soul crushingly dull, job. I pictured them, Mark probably pacing, Gwendolyn dabbing at dry eyes. The guilt, expertly wielded by them, pricked at me. What if they were actually starving? What if they did get evicted? Could I live with that? How much do you need for the rent? I asked, already knowing I was caving. The fight just drained out of me. Just 500, Mark said a little too quickly. That'll cover it and get us a few essentials. You're a lifesaver, Jazz. Seriously, we don't know what we'd do without you. 500. That was almost my entire food budget for the month, plus what I'd been trying to save for a desperately needed dental appointment. My teeth throbbed in sympathy. Okay, I whispered, feeling the familiar wave of resentment wash over me, quickly followed by the equally familiar wave of resignation. I'll transfer it. But Mark, this has to be the last time. I can't keep doing this. I know, sis. And we appreciate it more than words can say. Things will turn around soon. You'll see. His voice was suddenly lighter, the desperation vanishing as if by magic. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up, feeling hollowed out. I opened my banking app, my fingers trembling slightly as I navigated to the transfer screen. My own balance mocked me. With a deep breath, I typed in Mark's account details and the amount. $500. Sent. Gone. I stared at the confirmation, a bitter taste in my mouth. This wasn't helping, it was enabling. But the alternative, the thought of them truly destitute, was a burden I couldn't seem to shake, a fear my parents had unintentionally programmed into me. My phone pinged a few minutes later. A new text message. It was Mark. Thanks, sis. You're a lifesaver. Things are really bad this month. I let out a long, slow breath and dropped my head into my hands. When, I wondered, would really bad ever actually end for them? Or more to the point, for me? Weeks crawled by. Weeks of me eating ramen, of me dodging calls from the dentist about my overdue appointment, of me picking up extra shifts until my feet felt like lead weights. I'd managed to scrape together enough to keep my own lights on, just barely. Mark and Gwendolyn, true to form, had gone silent after the money transfer. That was their usual pattern, desperate pleas, followed by radio silence once their crisis was averted, only to resurface when the next self inflicted emergency arose. It was a rare Saturday morning off. I was slumped on my lumpy couch, a lukewarm cup of tea in hand, aimlessly scrolling through Facebook on my phone. Cat videos, baby pictures, endless political rants, the usual digital noise. Then a notification popped up. Paige tagged you in a comment on an album. Paige was an old friend from high school. We didn't see each other much anymore, but we kept in loose touch online. Curious, I tapped the notification. Her comment read, OMG, Jasmine, isn't this your brother Mark? Looks like they had an amazing time. So jealous. My brow furrowed. Mark? An amazing time? The album was posted by someone named Chloe R., a name I vaguely recognized as a distant acquaintance someone Gwendolyn had mentioned once or twice from her circle of influencer friends. The album title was Island Vibes and Good Times. I clicked on the album. The first photo loaded. My blood didn't just run cold, it felt like it turned to solid ice in my veins. There they were, Mark and Gwendolyn, beaming. Mark, shirtless and tanned, a pair of expensive-looking sunglasses perched on his head, a brightly colored cocktail in his hand. Gwendolyn in a skimpy designer bikini I'd never seen before, draped over him, her smile wide and carefree, a similar cocktail in her own hand. Behind them, a pristine, white sand beach stretched towards an impossibly turquoise ocean. Palm trees swayed gently. It looked like a postcard, a very, very expensive postcard. My hands started to shake. I scrolled to the next photo, Mark and Gwendolyn clinking champagne flutes on a balcony overlooking the sea at sunset. Gwendolyn posing by an infinity pool, Mark grinning from behind the wheel of a rented Jeep, the kind they use for tropical excursions. Photo after photo of them laughing, eating what looked like gourmet meals at beachside restaurants, snorkeling in crystal clear water. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a nice weekend away. This was a full-blown, luxurious tropical vacation. The kind of vacation I hadn't had in, well, ever. Then I saw the dates. Each photo was meticulously time-stamped. My eyes scanned them, disbelief warring with a rising tide of nausea. 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks and 5 days ago. 2 weeks and 3 days ago. The dates. They coincided exactly with the period Mark had called me, his voice cracking with fake despair, claiming they were starving, about to be evicted. The period I had sent them $500, my $500, to supposedly keep a roof over their heads and put food on their table. No, I whispered, the sound barely audible in my small apartment. No, it can't be. But it was. The evidence was right there, in glossy, high-definition color. Their tans were too deep, their smiles too genuine, the setting too undeniably opulent for this to be anything but the truth. My initial shock began to curdle into something else. Something hot and sharp. Betrayal. It clawed at my throat, making it hard to breathe. All those years of sacrifice, all those skipped meals, those patched up clothes, those anxious nights worrying about my own bills while I bailed them out. For this? So they could live it up in paradise while I ate instant noodles and counted pennies? The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it slammed into me like a physical blow. The lies, the manipulation, the crocodile tears. It had all been a carefully constructed charade, a performance designed to bleed me dry, and I, like a fool, had fallen for it every single time, blinded by a misplaced sense of familial duty. My finger, trembling with a rage I hadn't known I possessed, hovered over one particular photo. It was Mark and Gwendolyn again, champagne flutes raised high, their faces alight with smug satisfaction. The caption beneath it, penned by Gwendolyn, read, "Living our best life. You only live once. No regrets. Or paradise. Found Wag blessed. At your island getaway." The timestamp seared itself into my brain, posted just 2 days after Mark's desperate call, one day after my $500 had landed in their account. The money I'd sent them for rent and groceries. The ice in my veins began to thaw, replaced by a simmering heat. The world narrowed to that photo, to their triumphant, deceitful faces. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound, but something new was crystallizing alongside it, a cold, hard resolve. They weren't just going to get away with this. Not anymore. The screen of my phone became my window into their secret world. That first album was just the tip of the iceberg. Fueled by a potent cocktail of fury and adrenaline, I transformed into a digital detective. Paige's innocent tag had unknowingly handed me the key, and I was determined to unlock every rotten secret Mark and Gwendolyn had hidden. I started with Gwendolyn. Her main social media was carefully curated, lots of inspirational quotes about overcoming adversity, vague posts about struggles and keeping the faith, interspersed with heavily filtered selfies. Nothing overtly incriminating there, just the usual influencer fluff. But the album Paige had tagged me in wasn't on Gwendolyn's main page, it was on Chloe R's. That told me Gwendolyn was likely tagged in other people's public posts, things she couldn't control as easily. I searched for Gwendolyn's name, filtering by photos she was tagged in. Bingo! More albums, more parties, more trips. A weekend spa retreat with the girls from 6 months ago, right after Mark had called me, frantic about a supposed medical bill for Gwendolyn that insurance wouldn't cover. There were photos of her in a fluffy white robe, cucumber slices on her eyes, a champagne flute never far from her hand. The medical bill money, no doubt. Then I remembered Gwendolyn mentioning different online profiles. She'd once laughed about having a Finsta, a fake Instagram, a more private account for close friends. It took some digging, trying different variations of her name, her maiden name, nicknames, but I found it. It was set to private, of course, but her profile picture was a candid shot of her and Mark, looking very pleased with themselves, holding shopping bags from high-end stores, the kind of stores I only ever window shopped at. I didn't even bother trying to follow it. Instead, I focused on the public breadcrumbs. I scoured Chloe R's friend list, then the friend lists of her friends, looking for anyone who might have Gwendolyn or Mark in their public photos. It was tedious, painstaking work, but every new discovery was like another log on the fire of my rage. There were photos of them at fancy restaurants, the kind where appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Mark showing off a new smartwatch just weeks after he'd claimed his phone had died and he needed money for a cheap replacement. Gwendolyn posing with a new designer handbag, the same month she'd tearfully told me they couldn't afford to fix a leaky roof and begged for help. I started taking screenshots, dozens of them. Each photo, each timestamp, each boastful caption was another nail in their coffin. I cross referenced the dates of these extravagant outings with my own bank statements, highlighting the transfers I'd made to Mark. The pattern was sickeningly clear. Every time they'd spun a tale of woe, every time I'd sacrificed, they'd been living it up. My emergency funds were their vacation fund, their new gadget fund, their fine dining fund. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it all was what got to me the most. It wasn't just that they were irresponsible, they were actively, maliciously deceptive. They weren't just taking my money, they were stealing my peace of mind, my ability to provide for myself, all while laughing behind my back. I remembered countless conversations, Mark's voice tight with feigned anxiety, Gwendolyn's choked with fake tears. The car broke down, Jazz, and I need it for job interviews. Gwendolyn's wisdom tooth is killing her, and we don't have dental. The utility company is going to cut us off. Lies. All of it. Lies. The feeling of being a fool was overwhelming. How could I have been so blind, so gullible? For years, they'd played me, expertly tugging on my guilt strings, exploiting my sense of family loyalty. Then I found it, buried deep in the comments section of a photo on one of Gwendolyn's friends' public profiles, a picture of Gwendolyn showing off a new pair of ridiculously expensive shoes. A friend had commented, "Wow, Gwen, spoil yourself much. How do you swing it?" Gwendolyn's reply, clearly not intended for my eyes, made my vision go red. Heh heh, let's just say some relatives are more generous than smart. Jasmine's guilt complex is our little gold mine. What's our little gold mine? The phone nearly slipped from my trembling hand. That single, flippant comment, that casual admission of her contempt and manipulation, cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was personal. It was about the deliberate, cruel exploitation of my love and sense of duty. I leaned back, the phone clattering onto the coffee table. The initial shock had passed. The hurt was still there, a dull, throbbing ache. But now, a new feeling was taking root, cold and hard and sharp. It wasn't just about stopping the flow of money anymore. Oh no, they weren't just going to be cut off. They were going to face what they'd done. This wasn't just going to end. It was going to unravel, and I was going to be the one pulling the strings. This little gold mine, I vowed, was about to declare bankruptcy in the most spectacular way possible. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of timing, or maybe Mark and Gwendolyn were just that predictable. Barely a week after my digital deep dive, my phone rang. Caller ID. Mark. It was almost comical. Right on schedule for their next manufactured crisis. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. This was it, the first test. Could I play their game, just for a little while longer? I took a deep breath, picturing their smug, sun-kissed faces from those vacation photos, Gwendolyn's little gold mine comment echoing in my ears. Oh, I could play. Hey, Mark, I answered, injecting a note of weary concern into my voice, a tone I'd perfected over years of their nonsense. Jasmine. Oh, thank God. You won't believe what happened. His voice was already thick with that familiar, carefully rehearsed despair. What is it this time, Mark? I asked, keeping my tone gentle, sympathetic. Inside, a cold knot of anticipation tightened. Let him talk. Let him dig. It's the car, Jazz. The transmission, it's completely shot. The mechanic said it's going to be a fortune to fix, an absolute fortune, and I need it, for looking for work, for interviews. Ah, the phantom job interviews. A classic. Oh no, that's terrible, I cooed. How much are we talking about? He quoted, he quoted 800 Jazz, $800. And that's just for the parts, not even the labor. We're completely stuck. Gwendolyn's beside herself. As if on cue, I heard a faint, theatrical wail in the background. Gwendolyn, ever the supporting actress. Is that Gwen? I asked, feigning worry. Can I speak to her for a sec? There was a muffled exchange, then Gwendolyn's voice, trembling and tearful, came on the line. Jasmine? Oh, Jasmine, it's a nightmare. We don't know what to do. We were counting on that car. Mark had a really promising lead. And now this. A promising lead? That's great, Gwen, I said, laying the sympathy on thick. What kind of lead? She sniffled. Oh, it's complicated. But it was looking really good, and now I just feel so hopeless. More sniffles. Crocodile tears, I thought, remembering the champagne flutes and designer sunglasses. Don't worry, Gwen, I said, my voice dripping with false reassurance. We'll figure something out. Let me talk to Mark again. Mark came back on. So, sis, can you help us out? Just this once more. We're really in a bind. My fingers were clenched so tight my knuckles were white, but my voice remained calm, soothing. Of course, Mark. Family helps family, right? Let me see what I can do. I'll move some things around. Oh, Jazz, you're the best. Seriously, we'll pay you back, every cent, as soon as this job comes through. The relief in his voice was palpable and sickeningly familiar. No problem at all, I said. I'll sort it out today. We hung up. I stared at my phone, a grim smile playing on my lips. They'd taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker, but I didn't go to my banking app. I didn't transfer a single cent. Instead, I opened the folder on my laptop where I'd been meticulously organizing my evidence. Screenshots of their vacation photos, neatly labeled with dates, screenshots of Gwendolyn's little gold mine comment, copies of my bank statements with arrows pointing to the transfers I'd made to Mark, juxtaposed with the dates of their lavish expenditures. It was a damning collection, a tapestry of their deceit woven with my hard-earned money. Then I picked up my phone again. My thumb hovered over a different contact. Aunt Laura, Mom's older sister. She was the closest thing I had to a matriarch in the family, respected, sensible, and with a no-nonsense attitude I'd always admired. She'd also, on occasion, expressed quiet concerns about Mark's financial acumen, shall we say. My heart was still pounding, but this time with a different kind of energy. Not fear, but a steely resolve. "Aunt Laura?" I said, when she answered. "It's Jasmine." "Jasmine, dear? How lovely to hear from you. Is everything all right?" "Oh, yes, everything's fine with me," I said, keeping my voice light. "I was just wondering, have you heard from Mark and Gwendolyn lately?" There was a slight pause. "Mark?" "Yes, as a matter of fact, he called me just last week. Sounded like they were in a bit of a tight spot again." "Oh, really?" I feigned surprise. What was the issue this time? Something about their rent, I believe. Said they were a bit short. You know, Mark, always a drama. She chuckled, but there was an underlying weariness to it. I sent them a little something to tide them over. Poor Gwendolyn sounded so upset. My grip tightened on the phone. So, I wasn't the only gold mine. They were working multiple angles, preying on the kindness of anyone who would listen. "That was good of you, Aunt Laura," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "They seem to have a lot of emergencies." "Tell me about it," Aunt Laura sighed. "It's funny you ask, dear. They called me last week, too, with a very similar story." I sent them a little something. A cold fury, sharp and precise, settled over me. The deception wasn't just aimed at me, it was a family-wide grift. My resolve, already hard, solidified into something akin to tempered steel. This wasn't just about my money anymore. This was about protecting what was left of our family from these parasitic liars. And Aunt Laura, I suspected, was about to become a very important ally. The next few days were a masterclass in patience and subtle maneuvering. I didn't send Mark the $800 for the mythical car repair. Instead, I focused on two things: fortifying my digital dossier of their deceit and carefully, oh so carefully, planting seeds of doubt. My first call after Aunt Laura was to Yara, Gwendolyn's cousin. We weren't close, but we were friendly enough, occasionally liking each other's posts, the kind of distant family connection that exists on the periphery. Yara was younger, seemed pretty down to earth, and I had a hunch she wouldn't approve of Gwendolyn's antics if she knew the full extent. "Yara, hey, it's Jasmine," I said, keeping my voice casual when she picked up. "Sorry to bother you. I just had a quick question, and you know Gwendolyn better than I do." "Hey, Jasmine. No bother at all. What's up?" "It's just I saw some photos of Mark and Gwendolyn on that amazing tropical holiday they took a few weeks back. Looked incredible. But then Mark called me saying they were really struggling, like couldn't pay rent struggling. I got a bit confused. Did I misunderstand something? Were those old photos, maybe?" I infused my voice with a tone of innocent bewilderment. There was a pause on Yara's end. "Tropical holiday? Recently?" she asked, a note of surprise in her voice. "Gwen hasn't mentioned any holiday to me. Last I heard from her, she was complaining about how broke they were. Again?" "Oh, really?" I feigned further confusion. Huh, maybe I got the dates mixed up. It was on Chloe R's page, looked like a big group thing. Champagne, beaches, the works. They looked so happy. But if they're struggling, gosh, I feel awful for them. "Chloe R?" Yara repeated. "Hold on a sec." I could hear typing in the background. A few moments later, she let out a low whistle. "Wow. Okay, I see the album. That does not look like struggling, right?" I said, trying to sound concerned. "I just got worried, you know? Mark sounded so desperate. I hope they're okay." "Yeah," Yara said slowly, her voice now laced with a distinct coolness. "Me too. Thanks for the heads up, Jasmine. That's interesting." Seed planted. Meanwhile, Mark and Gwendolyn were starting to get antsy. The first text arrived 2 days after our call. "Hey sis, just checking if you managed to sort out that transfer. The mechanic is getting impatient." I replied vaguely, "Hey Mark, still working on it. Had a few unexpected things come up myself. Will let you know." Another day passed. Another text, this one a bit more demanding. "Jasmine, we really need that money. Did you send it or not?" My reply, So sorry. Things are a bit chaotic here. Trying to get it sorted. ASAP, I added a stressed face emoji for good measure. Let them sweat. The digital dossier was growing. I found more old posts, more tagged photos, more evidence of their lavish spending sprees, all meticulously dated and cross referenced with their pleas for cash. I even found a few online reviews Gwendolyn had left for boutique hotels and expensive restaurants, gushing about the wonderful service. Reviews posted mere days after claiming abject poverty to me or Aunt Laura. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Aunt Laura called me back a couple of days after our initial conversation. Her voice was different this time. Gone was the weary amusement, in its place was a steely edge I recognized. Jasmine, dear, she began without preamble, about Mark and Gwendolyn. After our chat, I did a little looking around myself, on that internet thing. I could almost hear her air quoting internet thing. And I must say, I am deeply, deeply concerned and frankly quite angry. Oh? I asked, trying to sound surprised. Yes, I saw those holiday pictures you mentioned. And then I remembered a few other emergencies they've had over the past year. It seems their idea of an emergency and my idea of an emergency are two very different things. Her voice was tight with indignation. Have they been asking you for money regularly, dear? Yes, Aunt Laura, I admitted. For years, actually. A sharp intake of breath on her end. For years? That boy? And that wife of his? The nerve. I know, I said quietly. I've been compiling some information. Dates, amounts, their social media posts. It's all quite illuminating. Illuminating is one word for it, Aunt Laura said grimly. Deceitful is another. We need to talk, Jasmine, properly. And I think a few other family members might need to be part of this conversation, too. My heart gave a little leap. She was on board, fully on board. Just then, my phone vibrated with an incoming text. It was Mark. The message was practically shouting through the screen. Jasmine, if you don't send that money by tomorrow, we're going to be evicted. This is serious. I'm not kidding. Where is the money? The desperation in his tone was palpable, even through text, but this time it didn't spark an ounce of guilt in me, only a cold, satisfying certainty. The trap was set, the actors were in place, and the curtain was about to rise on their final performance. The eviction threat text was the cue I'd been waiting for. They were officially desperate. The next morning, my phone rang, and it was Mark, as predicted. His voice, when I answered, was no longer laced with feigned despair. It was raw, furious, and demanding. Jasmine, what the hell is going on? Did you send that money or not? We're about to be thrown out on the street because of you. I let him rant. I listened to him accuse me of being heartless, of not caring about family, of deliberately trying to ruin their lives. It was quite the performance, full of bluster and righteous indignation. I pictured him pacing, his face red, Gwendolyn probably hovering nearby, feeding him lines or wringing her hands for dramatic effect. When he finally paused for breath, I spoke, my voice calm, almost serene. Mark, Gwendolyn, I said, knowing she was listening in, about your monthly allowance from the Bank of Jasmine. There was a confused silence on their end. I'm afraid, I continued, savoring each word, your direct debit to my guilt account has been permanently canceled. What what are you talking about? Mark stammered, the anger momentarily replaced by bewilderment. I'm talking about the lovely tropical vacation you both enjoyed a few weeks ago. Mark, I said, my voice still even. The one with the champagne and the fine dining and the designer sunglasses. The one that happened exactly when you told me you were starving and about to be evicted. Dead silence. I could practically hear their brains scrambling. I saw the photos, Mark, I went on. All of them. Chloe R's album was quite enlightening. The dates were very specific. Just a couple of days after I sent you $500 for rent and groceries. Photos? What photos? Mark blustered, but the conviction was gone from his voice. You you must be mistaken. Those were old photos. Were they, Mark? I asked sweetly, because the timestamp said otherwise, and Gwendolyn's tan looked remarkably fresh. Oh, and by the way, Gwendolyn, your comment about Jasmine's guilt complex being your little gold mine, not your smartest move to post that publicly, even on a friend's page. A sharp gasp from the other end. Then Gwendolyn's voice, shrill and panicked, snatched the phone. Jasmine, how dare you? You're twisting things. It's not what it looks like. You're trying to cause trouble. Am I, Gwendolyn? I replied, my calmness a stark contrast to her rising hysteria. Or am I just tired of being lied to and manipulated? Tired of funding your spa days while I eat instant noodles? Tired of paying for your emergency car repairs that mysteriously coincide with new smartwatches and designer handbags? You don't know what you're talking about, she shrieked. We've been struggling. We've been through so much. Really? I pressed. Because your social media tells a very different story. A story of luxury trips, expensive dinners, and a lifestyle far beyond the means of two people who are supposedly perpetually on the brink of financial ruin. A lifestyle funded, in large part, by me, and as I've recently discovered, by Aunt Laura, too. The mention of Aunt Laura seemed to stun them into a momentary silence. I've shared my concerns, Gwendolyn, I said, my voice hardening, and your glamorous struggles. With Aunt Laura, with Yara, they found your holiday photos quite illuminating as well. You, you what? Gwendolyn's voice cracked. The panic was escalating into full-blown terror. You went behind our backs? You talked to them? Just like you went behind mine every time you took my money under false pretenses? I countered. It seems we all have our ways of communicating, don't we? This is this is outrageous, Mark yelled, grabbing the phone back. You have no right. I have every right, Mark, I said firmly. It was my money, my sacrifice, and you both abused my trust and my kindness for years, but that's over now. The Bank of Jasmine is officially closed for business, permanently. You can't do this to us, Gwendolyn screeched, her voice now a desperate wail in the background. We'll be ruined. We'll have nothing. Perhaps you should have thought of that before you booked your tickets to paradise on my dime, I said, the ice in my voice unmistakable. There was a sputtering, incoherent rage from Mark. Then Gwendolyn's voice, venomous and shrill, cut through. You'll regret this, Jasmine. You're tearing this family apart. You'll be sorry. Then, the distinct sound of a phone slamming down, hard. I held my own phone to my ear for a moment longer, listening to the dead air. A small, faint smile touched my lips. The surge of power, of finally standing up to them, was intoxicating. No, Gwendolyn, I murmured to the silent line. You and Mark did that all by yourselves, and the real show is just about to begin. Aunt Laura didn't waste any time. The emergency family meeting, as she dubbed it, was scheduled via video conference for the following evening. The invite list was concise but potent. Me, Aunt Laura, Mark, Gwendolyn, Yara, and a couple of other aunts and uncles who, as Aunt Laura had grimly discovered, had also been periodically tapped by the Mark and Gwendolyn Distress Fund. She'd even invited Ricardo, an old family friend of hers, a retired accountant known for his blunt honesty and zero tolerance for nonsense. His presence alone signaled this wasn't going to be a gentle slap on the wrist. My nerves were a strange mix of jittery anticipation and calm resolve. I had my digital dossier prepped, ready to share on screen. Aunt Laura had called me earlier, her voice firm. You just lay it out, Jasmine. I'll handle the rest. It's time these two faced the music. When the video call connected, Mark and Gwendolyn's faces popped up in their little square. They looked awful, pale, drawn, eyes darting nervously. Gone was the bravado from the phone call. They looked like cornered animals. Good. Aunt Laura, a picture of stern, matriarchal authority, kicked things off. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining on short notice. We're here because some very disturbing information has come to light regarding Mark and Gwendolyn's financial activities. Mark started to bluster immediately. Now hold on, Aunt Laura. I think there's been a huge Mark, Aunt Laura cut him off, her voice like steel. You will have a chance to speak. Right now, Jasmine has something to share. All eyes, or rather, all video squares, turned to me. I took a breath and started screen sharing. First, the holiday photos. The champagne, the beaches, the designer gear. I narrated calmly, pointing out the dates, the captions. This, I said, was taken 2 days after Mark called me, claiming they were starving and about to be evicted, for which I sent them $500. A collective gasp went around the virtual room. Gwendolyn's face crumpled. Mark stared stonily at his screen. Then I moved on to the screenshots of their desperate pleas for money juxtaposed with my bank statement showing the transfers, the spa days, the new gadgets, the expensive dinners. I showed them Gwendolyn's little gold mine comment. Yara visibly recoiled at that one. And it wasn't just me, I continued, my voice steady. Aunt Laura, you mentioned they approached you for rent money around the same time they were sunning themselves in the tropics? Indeed, I did, Aunt Laura confirmed, her lips a thin, angry line, and I, like a fool, sent it. One by one, prompted by Aunt Laura, other relatives shared their stories. Uncle David had loaned them money for a utility bill that coincided with a weekend getaway they'd posted about. Aunt Carol had helped with a medical emergency that strangely aligned with Gwendolyn acquiring a new designer coat. The pattern was undeniable, a tapestry of lies woven across the entire family. Mark and Gwendolyn tried to interject, to deny, to deflect. Those photos are out of context, Mark insisted. People are twisting things. We were gifted some of those things, Gwendolyn cried, tears now streaming down her face. Real ones this time, I suspected, born of panic, not performance. Gifted? Ricardo, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. Gifted by whom, Gwendolyn? Because it sounds to me like the primary gift givers were your hardworking relatives under entirely false pretenses. That's not a gift, my dear. That's fraud. The word fraud hung heavy in the virtual air. Mark winced as if struck. Yara then spoke up, her voice shaking with anger. Gwen, I can't believe you, complaining to me about being broke while you're jetting off to resorts? Using Jasmine, using your own family like their personal ATMs? It's disgusting. The condemnation was universal. There was no escape, no sympathetic ear for them to whisper their lies to. They were surrounded, exposed, their carefully constructed facade shattered into a million pieces. Mark finally broke. He slumped in his chair, his face a mask of utter defeat. Okay, fine, he mumbled, barely audible. Maybe. Maybe we exaggerated things sometimes. We got in over our heads. Over your heads in champagne and five-star hotels, you mean? Aunt Laura snapped. You didn't exaggerate, Mark. You lied, consistently. You exploited people who love you. You stole from your own sister, from your aunts and uncles. Gwendolyn was openly weeping now, not the delicate sniffles of before, but ugly, heaving sobs. They weren't tears of remorse, I knew. They were tears for the life that was evaporating before her eyes. Ricardo delivered the final blow. Well, Mark, Gwendolyn, he said, his tone devoid of any sympathy. It seems your unearned income stream has dried up. I suggest you start by selling that fancy car, if it even exists. And Gwendolyn, those designer bags might fetch a pretty penny. Then you both need to get actual jobs. Real ones. The kind where you work for your money instead of conning it out of people. Aunt Laura nodded decisively. As far as this family is concerned, she declared, her gaze sweeping across the screen, lingering on Mark and Gwendolyn, you are on your own until you learn the meaning of honesty, hard work, and genuine remorse. Don't call any of us for a handout. The well is dry. With that, she clicked End Meeting. The screen went blank, leaving Mark and Gwendolyn in what I imagined was a stunned, isolated silence, the echoes of their family's collective disgust ringing in their ears. The catharsis was immense. Justice, it turned out, was a dish best served digitally with a side of irrefutable proof. The silence that followed the family video conference was initially deafening. For days, I kept expecting my phone to ring to see Mark's name flash up, followed by a barrage of abuse or perhaps a new, more desperate strain of pleading. But there was nothing. Just quiet. A week or so after the showdown, Aunt Laura called. Just thought you'd like an update, dear, she said, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of grim satisfaction. Word on the grapevine is that Mark and Gwendolyn are having a rather spectacular garage sale. Apparently, gently used designer goods and barely driven luxury items are on offer. She chuckled. Ricardo's advice seems to have hit home, at least on the selling part. Are they saying anything? I asked, a little surprised by the lack of direct fallout aimed at me. Not to me, and not to anyone else who was on that call, as far as I can tell, Aunt Laura replied. I think they're too busy trying to figure out how to pay their actual bills now that the free ride is over. Yara mentioned Gwendolyn actually applied for a job at a department store. Can you imagine? I could, and the image brought a small private smile to my face. Gwendolyn, who considered herself too delicate for work, having to fold sweaters and deal with demanding customers. Karma, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. A few voicemails did eventually trickle in on my phone. The first one was from Mark a week after the garage sale news. His voice was low, almost a mumble. Jazz, look, we, maybe we messed up. A bit. But you didn't have to humiliate us like that. It was harsh. No apology. Just blame. I deleted it without a second thought. The next one, a few days later, was Gwendolyn. Her tone was sharp, accusatory. You think you're so clever, Jasmine, turning everyone against us. You've ruined our lives. I hope you're happy. Click. Deleted. The final one came about a week after that. It was Mark again. This time, his voice was small, pitiful, the manufactured despair replaced by what sounded like genuine, pathetic desperation. Jess, please, we're really, we're really struggling. Just a little something? To get by? Please? It was almost a whisper. I listened to the whole thing, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. Then I deleted that one too. Unheard in a way, because the words no longer had any power over me. The money I wasn't sending them started to accumulate in my bank account. It was a novel feeling. I paid off my overdue dental bill. I bought a new pair of work shoes, ones without holes. I even started a small savings account, something I'd never dreamed possible before. The biggest change, though, wasn't financial. It was the peace, the blessed, uninterrupted peace. No more dreading the buzz of my phone. No more carefully crafted sob stories. No more feeling that knot of guilt and resentment constantly churning in my stomach. Aunt Laura and I grew closer. We'd have coffee sometimes, and she'd share little snippets she'd heard. Mark had apparently taken a job as a delivery driver. Gwendolyn hadn't lasted at the department store, but was rumored to be working part-time as a receptionist at a vet clinic. They'd had to move out of their trendy apartment into a much smaller, much less glamorous place on the outskirts of town. The tropical tans had faded. The designer sunglasses were probably long gone. One sunny afternoon, I was sitting in a little cafe, sipping a latte, a real one, not the instant kind, and scrolling through a travel website on my laptop. I was looking at pictures of a quiet little coastal town, a place with hiking trails and cozy bed and breakfasts. Nothing extravagant, just peaceful. I clicked book on a long weekend getaway for myself, paid for with money I had earned and, more importantly, money I had kept. As I sat there, the gentle murmur of the cafe around me, I realized something. The sweetest sound in the world wasn't applause or praise or even the clinking of champagne glasses, though I wouldn't mind experiencing that legitimately one day. No, the sweetest sound, I decided, was the sustained, unbroken silence from Mark and Gwendolyn. A silence filled not with dread or obligation, but with my own quiet contentment, my own hard-won peace, and the distant, deeply satisfying hum of karma finally and thoroughly doing its work. Maybe, I thought, sipping my latte, I should write all this down. Put it out there. Not for revenge anymore, that was done. But maybe to warn someone else, someone like the old me, trapped in that cycle of guilt and obligation. Yeah, maybe I'd do that. Someone, somewhere, needed to know that sometimes the heaviest chains are the ones we allow others to place on us, and the most liberating sound is the click of them finally falling away.
I stared at the email on my screen, reading it for the 5th time, even though each word felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. Subject: Training Transition. Effective immediately from Marcus Peterson, CEO to Sarah Mitchell, Head of Operations. Sarah, starting Monday, you'll begin transitioning your responsibilities to Kevin Peterson. Over the next month, ensure he's fully trained on all operational aspects. Your last day will be October 15th. This decision is final. Best, Marcus, 15 years. I've given this company 15 years of my life. Worked my way up from junior analyst to head of operations. Built the systems that had transformed Davidson and Mills from a struggling regional player into an industry leader. And now I was being replaced by the CEO's 26-year-old nephew, whose biggest achievement was managing not to flunk out of business school. My hands shook as I closed my laptop. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see Kevin lounging at his desk, feet propped up, watching something on his phone. He'd been here 3 months as a management trainee, contributing nothing except endless complaints about the coffee quality and our outdated dress code. "Come in," I called out at the knock on my door, quickly wiping my eyes. Marcus Peterson himself stood in the doorway, his expensive suit and carefully styled gray hair a stark contrast to the smirk on his face. "Sarah, got my email, I assume." He settled into one of my visitor chairs without waiting for an invitation. "Look, I know this might seem sudden, but Kevin needs this opportunity. He's family, and family comes first." "Marcus," I kept my voice steady, professional. "The Miller merger is in final stages. The new inventory system rollout starts next week. The key for projections." He waved his hand dismissively. "Kevin will handle all that. Just make sure you train him properly. He spends half his day on TikTok." The words burst out before I could stop them. "He doesn't understand basic operations, let alone complex merger integrations. This could sink the company." Marcus's face hardened. "Careful, Sarah. Don't make this personal. Kevin has fresh ideas, new perspectives. Frankly, we need some young blood around here. Someone who understands modern business." "Modern business?" I laughed bitterly. "Like what?" "His suggestion to invest our emergency fund in Dogecoin." "That's enough." Marcus stood, his fake friendly demeanor vanishing. "Train Kevin, clear out your office, get your severance, or leave now with nothing. Your choice." As he stormed out, I saw Kevin watching through the glass, not even trying to hide his smirk. My severance package sat unopened on my desk. 2 months' pay for 15 years of service. The injustice of it burned in my throat. What Marcus didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd been preparing for something like this for years. Not this exactly, but I'd seen too many talented people pushed out, replaced by Marcus's endless parade of incompetent relatives and golf buddies. I'd watched him slowly destroy everything we built, all while padding his own pockets and his family's positions. So I'd started buying stock. Small amounts at first, whenever I could afford it, then larger chunks when my investments in other areas paid off. Always through different brokers, different entities. For 3 years, I'd been the mysterious investor steadily acquiring shares, keeping just under the disclosure threshold. Last week, when rumors of Kevin's promotion started circulating, I'd made my final move. One last major purchase, carefully timed and structured. The paperwork was probably sitting on the board secretary's desk right now, waiting to be processed. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small leather portfolio. Inside was a single document, proof of my controlling interest in Davidson and Mills, now at 51%. Obtained through careful planning, smart investing, and a lot of patience. Marcus thought he was forcing me to train my replacement. In reality, I was about to become his boss. The quarterly board meeting was in 2 days. Marcus had no idea that while he was busy pushing me out, I'd been quietly taking control of his company. He thought Kevin needed an opportunity. Well, I was about to give everyone a masterclass in real modern business. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd saved months ago. "Mr. Harrison, Sarah Mitchell. About that board seat we discussed. I'm ready to accept." The next morning, I arrived early. The office was quiet, most people wouldn't be in for another hour. I needed this time to prepare, to steady my nerves. The document confirming my controlling interest felt heavy in my bag. I walked past my office, soon to be Kevin's office, according to Marcus's grand plans, and headed to the conference room. Started setting up my presentation, the one I'd been perfecting for months. The one that would detail every questionable decision, every nepotistic hire, every financial misstep Marcus had made over the past 5 years. Bit early for a terminated employee, isn't it? I turned to find Marcus in the doorway, coffee in hand, looking smug. Board meetings not for hours, and it's closed session anyway. No need for any last-minute presentations. Actually, I smiled, feeling surprisingly calm. I have every right to be here. In fact, I need to prepare. It's my first meeting as majority shareholder. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, splattering across the carpet. "What did you say?" I slid the document across the table. 51%, Marcus. Through completely legal, properly documented stock purchases over the past 3 years. You were so busy watching your nephew's TikToks, You never noticed who was buying up your company. His face went from red to white as he scanned the paperwork. This is impossible. You can't afford. You're just an employee. I finished for him. You never did bother to acknowledge my contributions properly. My bonuses, my stock options, I invested every penny. While you were busy installing your family members in cushy positions, I was quietly becoming your boss. The sound of voices in the hallway made him jump. Other early arrivals starting their day, unaware of the drama unfolding in the conference room. You can't do this, he whispered, but his voice had lost all its previous authority. The board will be very interested in my presentation today, especially the part about the money you've been funneling to your brother's fake consulting company. Or should we discuss Kevin's proposed Dogecoin investment first? He gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. What do you want? Want? I logged into my laptop, pulled up my presentation. I want to run this company properly, Marcus. No more nepotism. No more questionable financial decisions. No more pushing out talented people to make room for your relatives. I'll resign, he offered quickly. Just name your price. I almost laughed at how quickly he turned to bribery. Oh, I don't want your resignation yet. First, you're going to sit through this board meeting. You're going to watch as I detail every mistake you've made. Then you're going to experience what it feels like to be at someone else's mercy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here he was, begging to keep his job, just like I had yesterday. But unlike him, I wasn't going to enjoy his humiliation. This wasn't about revenge. It was about fixing what he'd broken. The board members will be here soon, I said, checking my watch. Why don't you get yourself together? It's going to be a long meeting. As he stumbled out, I saw Kevin arriving, sauntering toward what he thought would be his new office. He had no idea that his cushy promotion was about to evaporate along with all of Marcus's authority to grant it. I'd worked 15 years to build this company into something special. Now I had the power to protect it, and everyone else Marcus had tried to push aside. The board meeting was about to change everything, and I was ready. The boardroom filled slowly. I recognized most of the faces. Elderly men in expensive suits who'd rubber-stamped Marcus's decisions for years. They barely glanced at me as they took their seats, probably assuming I was there to take notes or serve coffee. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his usual confidence replaced by a sickly pallor. His brother James, Kevin's father, and another board member kept shooting him concerned looks. I noticed Marcus hadn't warned him about what was coming. Before we begin, Marcus's voice cracked slightly. There's been a development. Ms. Mitchell has some information to share. All eyes turned to me, most expressions ranging from confused to annoyed. James Peterson actually checked his watch. Thank you, Marcus. I stood, placing my documents on the table. As of yesterday, I am the majority shareholder of Davidson and Mills, holding 51% of voting shares. The reaction was immediate. James Peterson jumped to his feet, face red. That's impossible. Where would you get that kind of money? I smiled, sliding copies of my documentation to each board member. 15 years of bonuses, stock options, and smart investments. Every purchase properly documented and legally executed. You can verify with your own attorneys, but I assure you it's ironclad. This is absurd, James sputtered. Marcus, do something. But Marcus just stared at the table, knowing what was coming next. Now let's discuss some concerning patterns I've observed. I continued pulling up my presentation, starting with the $2.3 million in consulting fees paid to Peterson Analytics last year. James went pale. His consulting company, the one that had never produced a single report or deliverable. Or perhaps we should examine the 7 executive positions currently held by Peterson family members, none of whom met the minimum qualifications for their roles. I clicked through slides showing their resumes or lack thereof, including the recent attempt to install Kevin Peterson as head of operations, despite his complete lack of relevant experience. The other board members were flipping through my documentation now, their expressions darkening as they realized the extent of the nepotism and mismanagement. This ends today, I stated firmly. I'm implementing immediate changes to protect this company's future. What followed was the most intense 3 hours of my life. I detailed every questionable decision, every wasteful expenditure, every instance of nepotism that had weakened our company. The board members, many of whom had dozed through previous meetings, were now fully engaged. By the time I finished, the mood in the room had shifted dramatically. These men might have been Marcus's golf buddies, but they were also businessmen who'd invested heavily in Davidson and Mills. They couldn't ignore the evidence of mismanagement I presented. I moved for an immediate vote of no confidence in Marcus Peterson as CEO. Richard Harrison, our oldest board member, announced. Others quickly seconded. Marcus finally found his voice. "You can't do this. This company has been in my family for 3 generations. I cut in, and you've nearly destroyed it with your nepotism and mismanagement." The vote, gentlemen? It was unanimous. Even James, seeing which way the wind was blowing, voted to remove his own brother as CEO. "Ms. Mitchell," Harrison turned to me, "given your controlling interest and evident understanding of this company's operations, I move to appoint you as interim CEO. All in favor?" Another unanimous vote. Marcus slumped in his chair, defeated. "My first act as CEO," I announced, "is to terminate the employment of all unqualified executives, effective immediately. Mr. James Peterson, your consulting contract is also terminated. Security will escort you to clear out your offices." As if on cue, security appeared at the door. I'd arranged this days ago, knowing how the meeting would end. "You can't just throw us out," James protested. "We built this company." "No," I corrected him. "The employees you exploited built this company, the ones you pushed aside to make room for your family members. That ends now." As security led them out, I could hear Kevin in the hallway, his voice rising in protest as he realized his cushy future had evaporated. The remaining board members stayed to discuss transition plans. I already had a list of qualified internal candidates to promote into the vacant executive positions. Talented people who'd been overlooked in favor of Marcus's relatives. That evening, I sat in my office, my real office now, the CEO's corner suite, reviewing personnel files. A knock at the door interrupted my work. "Come in," I called, surprised to see Marcus standing there. Security must have let him up for one last visit. "I underestimated you," he said quietly. "All these years I thought you were just another employee, someone I could push around, replace when convenient." "That was your mistake," I replied. "You saw people as tools to use and discard. I saw them as the heart of this company." He nodded slowly. "The board approved your reorganization plan. James is furious, threatening to sue, but we both know he won't. Too much would come out in discovery." "Was there something you wanted, Marcus, besides stating the obvious?" He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "My formal resignation. I assume you were going to demand it anyway." I took the envelope, not bothering to open it. "You know what the real difference between us is, Marcus? You saw this company as your family's property, something to exploit. I saw it as a responsibility to our employees, our customers, our community. And now it's all yours," he said bitterly. "No," I corrected him. "Now it belongs to everyone who works here, everyone who earns their position through merit, not nepotism. That's the company I'm going to build." After he left, I walked through the quiet office. Most employees had gone home, but a few lights still burned at distant desks, dedicated people staying late to finish projects, unaware that their workplace was about to transform. Tomorrow would bring big changes. My first company-wide memo was already drafted, announcing the restructuring and new opportunities for internal advancement. The qualified employees Marcus had overlooked would finally get their chance to shine. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Saw the company announcement, CEO. Why didn't you tell me?" I smiled, remembering all the times I'd wanted to share my plan but couldn't risk it leaking. Mom had taught me the value of patience, of working quietly toward your goals while others underestimated you. "Never let them see you coming," she always said. Well, they hadn't seen me coming, and now Davidson and Mills would become the company it should have been all along. I glanced at the brass nameplate on my desk. Sarah Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer. It had a nice ring to it. Somewhere across town, Marcus was probably drowning his sorrows, wondering how his just an employee had outmaneuvered him so completely. Kevin was likely updating his LinkedIn profile, discovering that his primary qualification, being Marcus's nephew, suddenly carried a lot less weight. But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about tomorrow, about the changes I would implement, the careers I would help build, the company culture I would transform. Marcus had tried to force me to train my replacement. Instead, I'd replaced him. Sometimes karma works out perfectly. The next morning, I arrived early again. Old habits die hard. But this time, instead of preparing for battle, I was preparing to rebuild. The company-wide email went out at 8 a.m. sharp. Dear colleagues, today marks a new chapter for Davidson and Mills. Merit, not connections, will determine advancement. Hard work, not nepotism, will shape our future. I know many of you have felt overlooked, undervalued, held back by an old system that prized relationships over results. That ends now. In the coming weeks, all executive positions will be open to internal applications. Every employee will have a fair chance to advance based on their qualifications and contributions. This is your company too. Let's build something extraordinary together. Best regards, Sarah Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer. The responses started flooding in immediately. Messages of congratulation, of hope, of relief that things were finally changing. But my favorite came from Janet in accounting, who'd been passed over for promotion 3 times in favor of Marcus's golf buddies. Thank you for showing us that sometimes justice wins. When can I apply for CFO? I smiled and typed back, applications open Monday. May the best candidate win. Marcus had taught me an unintended lesson. If you want something done right, sometimes you have to take over the whole company to do it. Lesson learned, Marcus. Lesson learned. The rain fell softly on the day we buried my grandmother, Eleanor Rose, the last link to my mother's family and owner of what my in-laws dismissively called that dusty old junk shop on Main Street. What Rose Antiquities lacked in modern glamour, it made up for in character. 3 floors of carefully curated history that had been my second home since childhood. My name is Emma Taylor, and this is the story of how my grandmother's worthless antique shop turned out to be worth more than anyone could have imagined, in ways that went far beyond mere money. Really, Emma, my mother-in-law Barbara said as we left the funeral, her designer umbrella held carefully away from her expensive suit. You can't possibly be thinking of keeping that old shop. It's taking up prime real estate in the historic district. The smart thing would be to sell to developers. I clutched the shop's keys tighter in my pocket. Grandma Eleanor had given them to me a week before she passed, along with a cryptic message I was still trying to understand. The real treasure isn't always what it appears to be, dear. Sometimes you have to know where to look. The shop stays, I said firmly. My husband Michael shifted uncomfortably beside me, caught as usual between his wife and his mother. But darling, Barbara persisted, you have a career in finance to think about. Managing a failing antique shop is hardly. I said no. My voice came out sharper than intended, drawing looks from other funeral guests. But I couldn't help it. The shop was all I had left of both my grandmother and my mother, who had died in a car accident when I was 12. Eleanor had raised me among those antiques, teaching me the stories behind each piece, training my eye to spot quality and craftsmanship. That evening, after the mourners had gone home and Michael had taken his parents back to their hotel, I went to the shop alone. The bell above the door chimed softly as I entered, its familiar tone bringing tears to my eyes. Everything was exactly as Grandma had left it. The Lewis XV chair she'd been restoring still sat in her workspace, the ledger still neat on her desk, the displays still perfectly arranged. I made my way to her office in the back, remembering all the afternoons I'd spent there doing homework while she worked. The old roll-top desk stood against the wall, its surface covered with papers and catalog references. As I began sorting through them, a leather-bound book caught my eye. It wasn't one of the shop's regular ledgers. This one was older, its pages yellowed with age. Inside, in my grandmother's elegant handwriting, was a catalog unlike anything I'd seen before. Each entry detailed not just items and prices, but complex codes and references I didn't understand. Some entries had stars next to them. Others have letters that seemed to correspond to nothing in the shop's inventory. Oh, Grandma, I whispered, what were you up to? A knock at the shop's front door made me jump. Through the glass, I could see Dr. Marcus Chen from the university's history department, one of Grandma's regular customers and closest friends. I'm sorry to disturb you, Emma, he said when I let him in. But Eleanor asked me to come. She left something for you with me to be delivered after. He handed me an envelope, thick with what felt like a key inside. She said you'd need this once you found her special ledger. My hand trembled as I opened it. Inside was indeed a key, old, brass, intricately carved, and a letter. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then you found my real inventory book, and Marcus has kept his promise to deliver this key. What I'm about to tell you must be kept secret for now. There are people who wouldn't understand what I've spent my life protecting. Rose Antiquities isn't just an antique shop. It's a safe house for some of history's most significant lost treasures. Your grandfather and I started this work in 1962, helping European museums recover artwork that had been stolen during World War II. Over the years, it evolved into something bigger. The coded entries in my ledger, those are the real items, hidden in plain sight among the regular inventory. The stars mark pieces that museums and collectors have been searching for decades. The letters correspond to their true provenance. But you have to be careful. There are people who have suspected what we do, the Carmichael family in particular. They've been trying to buy the shop for years, not for the real estate, but because they think they know what's hidden here. The key opens a hidden room in the basement. Take Marcus with you when you go down. He knows about some of the pieces, and you'll need his expertise to understand the full scope of what's there. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this while I was alive. It was safer for you not to know. But you're ready now. You've always had the eye for it, even as a child. Remember when you spotted that fake Tiffany lamp at the Anderson estate sale? You were only 10, but you knew something wasn't quite right about the glass work. Be careful who you trust, and whatever you do, don't let anyone pressure you into selling, especially not the Carmichaels. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. P.S. That Louis XV chair I was restoring. Look under the seat cushion. The papers there will explain everything about the Vermeer. I looked up at Marcus, my mind spinning. The Vermeer? As in Johannes Vermeer? The Dutch master? He nodded gravely. Perhaps we should check the basement before we discuss this further. The walls here, they have ears. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Mom's insisting on coming by the shop tomorrow morning to help you catalog everything for the estate sale. I tried to tell her no, but you know how she gets. I looked at Marcus, then at the key in my hand. How long will it take to see what's in the basement? Several hours at least. Some of these pieces, they'll need careful documentation. Then we better get started. Barbara Winston isn't known for her patience, and tomorrow morning she's going to learn that her daughter-in-law's worthless inheritance is anything but junk. As we headed toward the basement door, I could have sworn I heard Grandma Eleanor's soft chuckle among the antiques. The real adventure was about to begin. The basement key turned with a soft click that seemed to echo through the silent shop. Marcus held the flashlight steady as we descended the narrow stairs, past the regular storage area I'd known all my life, to a section of wall that had always looked perfectly ordinary. Your grandmother was brilliant with hiding things in plain sight, Marcus said, running his hands along the wooden paneling. Most people never realize that this wall doesn't match the building's actual dimensions. The hidden door blended so perfectly that even knowing it was there, I barely saw the seam. It swung open silently, revealing a climate-controlled room that stretched nearly the length of the building. Oh my God, I whispered as Marcus found the light switch. The room was a museum-quality storage facility. Temperature and humidity monitors blinked steadily on the walls. Carefully labeled crates lined industrial shelving units. Paintings hung on specialized racks. Display cases held smaller items, each one tagged with the same coding system I'd seen in Grandma's ledger. Start with the chair, Marcus suggested. The Vermeer connection is significant. I found the Louis XV chair where we carried it down last week for Grandma's restoration. The cushion lifted easily, revealing a hidden compartment containing a thick file and what looked like original provenance documents from the 1940s. During World War II, Marcus explained as I read, many Jewish families in Amsterdam hid their valuable artworks before fleeing. One family had a Vermeer, a previously unknown work. They disassembled the frame, hid the canvas inside this chair, and sent it to America with other furniture. Your grandparents helped track down the family's heirs. But this documentation, it's about more than just one painting. Eleanor and Robert, your grandfather, they built a network. Museums, art historians, legitimate dealers, all working to recover lost art and artifacts. This shop became a safe waypoint. Items could be hidden here, documented, authenticated, and returned to their rightful owners. I moved through the room in a daze, matching codes from the ledger to items on the shelves. Each piece had a story. ancient artifacts looted from archaeological sites, artwork stolen by the Nazis, cultural treasures taken during colonial periods. The Carmichaels, I said suddenly, remembering Grandma's warning. They know about this. They suspect Gregory Carmichael's father was involved in some questionable acquisitions. He's been trying to find evidence of lost pieces for years. That's why they keep trying to buy the building. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Michael. Mom's determined to come by first thing tomorrow. Says she's already called an estate liquidator. I looked at my watch. 11:30 p.m. How many people do you trust completely to help us document all this tonight? Marcus was already on his phone. I can have a small team here in 30 minutes. All vetted. All who worked with Eleanor before. The next 8 hours were a blur of careful photography, detailed documentation, and incredible discoveries. Dr. Sarah Williams from the Metropolitan Museum's Authentication Department arrived at midnight. Professor James Chen, Marcus's brother, from the Smithsonian joined us at 2 a.m. Each new finding left them more amazed. This Buddha statue, Sarah whispered, examining a seemingly modest bronze figure. It was looted from a temple in Myanmar in 1945. Museums have been searching for it for decades. The provenance papers are all here, I said, checking the ledger. Grandma was helping the temple reclaim it. James was carefully examining a collection of Native American artifacts. These were stolen from a reservation museum in 1972. The tribe has been trying to recover them ever since. By 7 a.m., we had preliminary documentation of over 200 significant pieces. Their combined value was staggering, but more importantly, each item represented a piece of history that could finally be returned to its rightful owners. At 8:30 a.m. sharp, the shop's bell chimed. Barbara Winston's voice carried down the stairs. Emma, we're here to help you start clearing out this mess. I met them in the main shop area, where Barbara was already placing post-it notes on pieces she deemed salvageable for the estate sale. Michael stood awkwardly by the door while his mother took control. I've called Harrison's auction house, she announced. They can clear everything out by next week, though honestly most of this should probably just go to Goodwill. That won't be necessary, I said calmly. I've already had the inventory evaluated. Oh honey, she laughed, I know you're attached to your grandmother's little collection, but we need to be realistic about Mrs. Winston. Sarah Williams appeared from the basement stairway, her Metropolitan Museum ID badge clearly visible. I'm Dr. Williams, head of authentication at the Met. We're going to need you to step away from that salvageable piece you just tagged. It's a 15th century Italian devotional piece that was looted from a church in Florence in 1944. Barbara's hand jerked back from the small wooden panel as if it had burned her. What? Emma, James Chen called from the basement door. The Smithsonian's director is on FaceTime. He'd like to discuss the Native American artifacts. Michael found his voice first. Emma, what's going on? I held up Grandma's ledger. Rose Antiquities wasn't just an antique shop. It was a safe house for recovering stolen art and artifacts. Grandma and Grandpa spent 50 years helping return lost treasures to their rightful owners. But that's impossible, Barbara sputtered. Eleanor was just a small-town antique dealer. Actually, Marcus said, emerging with a familiar-looking folder. She was one of the most respected art recovery experts in the world. She just preferred to work quietly. He opened the folder, revealing newspaper clippings dating back to the 1960s, stories of mysterious recoveries of lost artworks, each one mentioning an anonymous American source. The shop stays, I said firmly, and the work continues. Just then, the bell chimed again. Gregory Carmichael strode in, his usual air of entitled confidence firmly in place. Ah, Emma, I heard about Eleanor's passing. I have some papers for you to sign. A very generous offer for the property. Mr. Carmichael, I smiled, channeling a bit of Grandma Eleanor's steel. I believe you know Dr. Chen from the Smithsonian. He was just cataloging some interesting pieces, including several that match the descriptions of items your father acquired under questionable circumstances in 1965. The color drained from his face. Beside me, I felt Michael step closer, finally understanding what side of history he needed to be on. The next few months transformed everything. The shop's public face remained. We still sold legitimate antiques to regular customers. But now Michael helped me manage the more complex operation below, carrying on Eleanor and Robert's legacy of returning lost treasures to their rightful owners. Barbara stopped coming by the shop. The one time she did visit, she happened to be there when we returned a medieval manuscript to a small monastery in France. The abbot's tears of joy as he reclaimed his order's lost treasure seemed to finally help her understand that some things are worth more than their sale value. Last week, I found a letter I hadn't noticed before, tucked into the back of Grandma's ledger. Emma, by now you've discovered what Rose Antiquities really is, not just a shop, but a mission. Each piece here represents a fragment of someone's heritage, a part of history that deserves to go home. Your mother understood this. She was helping us research lost artworks when she had her accident. I couldn't bear to tell you then, but I knew someday you'd be ready to know, and to continue what we started. The real treasure isn't in the monetary value of these pieces. It's in the joy of a family reclaiming their heritage, a museum completing their collection, a culture restoring its artifacts. That's the true worth of what we do. Take care of our life's work, dear one. And remember, sometimes the most valuable things are hidden in plain sight. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. The shop still stands on Main Street, looking much as it always has. Customers still browse for vintage furniture and interesting curios. But now I understand why Grandma spent so much time in her office, making international calls in the middle of the night. Why certain pieces would disappear without ever being sold. Why some visitors would leave with tears of joy after private meetings in the back room. Michael helps manage a legitimate antique business now, having left his corporate job to join me full-time. He has a good eye for it, though he still sometimes shakes his head in amazement when we unlock that basement door. Barbara tells her country club friends that her daughter-in-law does something with art recovery, making it sound as prestigious as possible without understanding the real scope of our work. That's fine. Like Grandma Eleanor, I've learned that sometimes it's better to let people believe what they want to believe. Yesterday, a young woman came into the shop clutching a faded photograph of a painting that had hung in her grandmother's house in Warsaw before the war. As I took her to my office and opened Grandma's ledger to check a familiar code, I could almost hear Eleanor's voice. The real treasure isn't always what it appears to be, dear. Sometimes you have to know where to look. Rose Antiquities continues its quiet mission, hiding history's lost treasures in plain sight until they can find their way home. And in my grandmother's old office, I'm teaching my own daughter about provenance, authenticity, and the true value of preserving the past. Some might call it just another antique shop, but we know better. After all, the most precious things often look ordinary to those who don't know where to look. The Anderson retail headquarters gleamed in the morning sun, 50 stories of glass and steel reaching into the Chicago skyline. I stood in my brother Mark's new office, formerly our father's office, and tried to keep my expression neutral as he delivered the news of my termination. My name is Sarah Anderson, and at 33, I had just watched my family's legacy, my life's work, and my revolutionary retail management system be stolen by my own brother. It's nothing personal, Sarah, Mark said, leaning back in Dad's leather chair, the same chair where our father had sat 6 months ago, before his stroke, telling me how proud he was of my innovations. The board feels the company needs stronger leadership in the tech division. I glanced at the digital clock on his desk, 9:47 a.m. In exactly 24 hours, he would be presenting his new retail management system to the board. The system I'd spent 3 years developing. The system that could revolutionize how major retailers handle everything from inventory to customer data. Of course, I said mildly, I understand completely. Mark's smile faltered slightly. He'd expected tears, protests, maybe even threats. After all, I was the emotional one in the family, according to him. The one who cared too much about employees, who wanted to revolutionize retail for more than just profit. Security will escort you to clear out your office, he continued, regaining his composure. Standard procedure, you understand. We wouldn't want any sensitive information leaving the building. I thought about the small camera hidden in my office plant, the one that had been recording his late-night meetings for the past 3 months. The midnight conversations with board members, the promises of increased profits if they supported his takeover, the methodical way he planned to steal my work and push me out. Of course not, I agreed, though I'm sure you've already secured all the important files. Everything related to the new system is safely under company control, he said smugly. Your personal access has been revoked. He meant the official servers, the documented development files. What he didn't know about was the hidden backend I'd built into the system. The failsafes I'd implemented when I first noticed files being copied late at night. Congratulations on the presentation tomorrow, I said, standing up. I'm sure the board will be very impressed. They will be, he said, then added with fake sympathy, I know this is hard, but you'll land on your feet. Maybe a smaller company would be more your speed. Somewhere less demanding. I shouldered my bag, thinking about the encrypted drive in my apartment containing footage of every meeting where he plotted this takeover. You're probably right. Anderson Retail might be too big for someone like me. The security guard, Jim, who'd watched me grow up in this building, gave me an apologetic look as he escorted me to my office. This isn't right, Miss Sarah, he muttered. It's okay, Jim, I said as I began packing my personal items. Everything happens for a reason. My office overlooked Michigan Avenue, the same view I'd had since joining the company fresh out of MIT. While the security guard wasn't looking, I quickly retrieved the hidden camera from the Peace Lily, Dad's gift when I was promoted to head of technology 3 years ago. Need help with those boxes, Miss Sarah? Jim asked as I finished packing. No thanks, Jim, but could you do me a favor? Could you make sure my plant gets a good home? Maybe in the security office? It needs water every 3 days. Jim nodded, understanding in his eyes. He'd been here 30 years, had seen the way things had changed since Dad's stroke. I'll take good care of it, he promised. In the elevator, I checked my phone. 3 messages from Lisa, my lead developer. They're locking us out of the system. Mark's team is taking over everything. What do we do? I typed back, stick to the plan. See you at the usual place tonight. The lobby was busy with morning traffic, employees hurrying to their offices, unaware that the company they worked for was about to change forever. Janet, the receptionist who'd given me candy when I visited Dad as a child, wiped away tears as I handed in my security badge. This isn't what your father would have wanted, she whispered. I know, I said. But sometimes things have to break before they can be fixed properly. Outside, Chicago's spring air was crisp and full of promise. I walked to the corner where my car was parked, placed my box of belongings in the trunk, and pulled out my other phone, the secure one that even Mark didn't know about. A text from my contact at the SEC. Documentation received. Extremely interesting reading. Meeting still on for 3 p.m. Confirmed, I replied, bringing additional evidence. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing the video footage from the hidden camera. Mark's face glowed with triumph as he outlined his plan to various board members. Sarah's too soft for this business. The system needs a stronger hand. Think of the profit margins if we implement it my way. Of course, I developed the core concepts. I just let her handle the technical details. My laptop pinged, an alert from the hidden backend I built into the system. Mark's team was trying to modify the source code, probably removing my digital fingerprints. Little did they know that every change they made was being logged, every attempt to alter the documentation creating an unalterable record of their tampering. My phone buzzed. Lisa calling. Everyone's in position, she reported. The team is ready. But Sarah, are you sure about this? Once we do this. There's no going back, I finished. I know, but Mark left us no choice. He's not just stealing my work. He's planning to turn the system into something it was never meant to be. Something that would hurt thousands of employees, millions of customers. Your father would be proud, Lisa said quietly. I looked at the photo on my wall. Dad and me at my MIT graduation, his face beaming with pride. He'd built Anderson Retail from a single store into a national chain, but he'd never lost sight of what mattered. The people who made it work. Tomorrow's going to be interesting, I said. Make sure everyone's ready. After hanging up, I walked to my home office and opened the hidden wall safe. Inside was the evidence I'd been gathering for months. Financial records showing Mark's manipulation of company funds, documentation of his secret meetings with competitors, and most importantly, the original development logs of my retail management system. I pulled out Dad's letter, the one he'd written just before his stroke, the one Mark didn't know existed. Tomorrow, its contents would change everything. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best suit, The one Dad had bought me when I became head of technology. As I fastened my mother's pearl necklace, I thought about legacy, about responsibility, about the right way to run a business. My phone buzzed. Board meeting starts in 1 hour. Everything is in place. I smiled at my reflection. Mark thought he'd won, thought he'd successfully stolen everything I'd built. He had no idea that his moment of triumph was about to become something very different. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just exposing the truth. It's letting your enemies present their own lies to the very people they're trying to deceive. I grabbed my laptop and headed for the door. It was time to show my brother exactly who he'd underestimated. Anderson Retail's main conference room was packed with board members, executives, and major shareholders. I slipped in quietly just as Mark began his presentation, taking a seat at the back where my brother's triumph would have the perfect view of its own undoing. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark began, standing at the head of the long table in an expertly tailored suit. Today marks a new era for Anderson Retail. What I'm about to show you will revolutionize not just our company, but the entire retail industry. I opened my laptop silently, connecting to the room's wireless network. Lisa's text appeared. Backend access confirmed. Ready when you are. This retail management system, Mark continued, clicking to his first slide, represents thousands of hours of development, a seamless integration of inventory management, customer data, and predictive analytics. My fingers moved across the keyboard, accessing the hidden protocols I built into the system. On the screen behind Mark, his presentation continued flawlessly. He had no idea that every click was being logged, every demonstration creating an unalterable record. The potential for profit maximization is unprecedented, he said, warming to his theme. By implementing aggressive data collection and dynamic pricing, we can increase margins by up to 40%. Several board members nodded approvingly. They didn't understand that what Mark was proposing would turn my system, designed to balance efficiency with ethical business practices, into a tool for exploiting both employees and customers. Question, called out Janet Chen, one of the newer board members. The privacy implications of this level of data collection are completely manageable, Mark interrupted smoothly. The technical details aren't important right now. What matters is the bottom line. I pressed enter. On my screen, a message flashed. Original documentation uploaded. Timestamp development logs active. Let me demonstrate the system's capabilities, Mark said, turning to the main display. He clicked confidently, expecting to show a carefully curated demo. Instead, the screen shifted to show side-by-side comparisons. The original ethical design specifications I developed, next to Mark's modified versions showing how he planned to exploit the system. What? Mark clicked frantically, but the presentation was no longer under his control. Interesting modifications, I said, standing up. All heads turned, especially the parts where you removed all the employee protection protocols and customer privacy safeguards. There must be a technical glitch, Mark stammered. Security. They can't help, I said calmly. The system is responding exactly as it was designed to, by me, its original creator. The room erupted in murmurs. I walked to the front, each step measured and confident. Board members of Anderson Retail, I began, what my brother has shown you is a corrupted version of a system I spent 3 years developing. A system designed to modernize retail while protecting the rights of employees and customers. A system our father approved and supported. She's lying, Mark snapped. I developed. Really? I pressed another key. The hidden camera footage began playing. Mark in late-night meetings, plotting his takeover, admitting to stealing my work. That's illegal surveillance, he sputtered. Actually, said a new voice from the doorway, it's evidence in a federal investigation. Special Agent Sarah Torres from the SEC stepped into the room, followed by 2 colleagues. Mark Anderson, we have some questions about certain financial transactions related to this software development. Mark's face went from red to white. This is ridiculous. I am the CEO. According to company bylaws, interrupted Howard Chen, the head of the board's legal committee, your interim CEO, pending review after your father's recovery. He held up a document, a recovery that, according to his doctors, has progressed significantly. In fact, we received this letter from him this morning. I smiled, remembering Dad's face when I visited him at the rehabilitation center last week. showing him the evidence of Mark's betrayal. His hand had been steady as he'd signed the letter revoking Mark's interim authority. The original system documentation, I said, distributing tablets to the board members, shows exactly how the development proceeded. You'll also find evidence of how Mark attempted to modify it for unethical purposes, along with records of his financial misconduct. The board members scrolled through the documents, their expressions darkening. Mark looked around wildly, finding no allies. "You don't understand," he tried. "The profit potential is substantial even without exploiting people." I cut in. "The system as originally designed would increase efficiency by 30% while improving employee satisfaction and customer loyalty. I have 3 years of test data proving it." "Which is why," Howard Chen said, "the board will be calling an emergency session to review leadership of both the company and this project." The next hour was a blur of SEC interviews, board discussions, and security escorting Mark from the building. I sat in Dad's office, Mark's office for such a short time, looking at the city sprawled below. "Miss Sarah." Jim, the security guard, stood at the door. "Your father's here." Dad walked in slowly, leaning on his cane, but his eyes were clear and sharp. "I always knew," he said, settling into his old chair, "that you were the one who truly understood this business. The way you built it," I said, "not just for profit, but for people." He nodded. "Mark never understood that. Success without ethics isn't success at all." The next few weeks were intense. The board unanimously voted to reinstate Dad as CEO, with me as Chief Technology Officer and heir apparent. Mark faced SEC investigations and criminal charges. The system rollout proceeded as originally designed, earning praise from both industry analysts and workers' rights groups. 1 month after the board meeting, I sat in my new office, not Dad's, but one with an even better view of the city. Lisa knocked on the door. "The first quarter results are in," she announced, grinning. "Employee satisfaction up 42%. Customer retention improved by 35%. And profits," she paused dramatically, "exceeded all projections." "Send them to Mark," I said, in his new office. The Federal Investigation Office. He never understood, I said, that doing the right thing could also be the profitable thing. Dad stopped by later that day, moving better now after months of rehabilitation. "Your mother would be proud," he said, looking at her picture on my desk. "She always said you had my head for business and her heart for people." I thought about legacy then, not just the buildings and profits, but the impact we have on lives. Mark had wanted to build an empire. I wanted to build something that mattered. Last week, I received an invitation to speak at a retail industry conference. The topic? Ethical innovation, the future of retail technology. I thought about Mark sitting in his prison cell after his conviction for fraud and corporate espionage and realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so meaningful that their attempts to destroy it only make it stronger. The Anderson retail headquarters still gleams in the morning sun, but it's different now. Employees smile more. Customers praise our service. The board talks about ethics as much as profits. And every morning when I walk through the lobby, Janet still offers me candy, just like she did when I was a little girl who dreamed of making her father proud. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in the moment of triumph, but in what you build after the battle is won. Mark tried to steal my work, but he could never steal my vision. Because true success isn't just about power or profit. It's about creating something that makes the world a little better than you found it. That's what Dad taught me. That's what I proved. And that's the real legacy I'll carry forward. The security camera footage from my office plant still sits in my safe, a reminder that sometimes the best defense against betrayal is simply letting people reveal their true nature. But I don't watch it anymore. I'm too busy building something better. After all, success is the best revenge, but only if you succeed in the right way. And as I review plans for expanding our ethical retail system nationwide, I know that the right way was worth fighting for. Because in the end, it's not about who wins or loses. It's about how you change the game itself. The Anderson Financial Group's boardroom hadn't changed in the 20 years since our father first brought me here. The same mahogany table, the same leather chairs, the same oil painting of the Boston Harbor that had watched over 3 generations of our family's leadership. But today, everything was different. I moved to formally remove David Anderson from the board of directors, my sister Elizabeth announced, her voice carrying the precise tone of corporate authority she perfected over the years. Following my acquisition of his shares during his unfortunate absence, he no longer has any standing in this company. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, watching the drama unfold exactly as I'd expected it would. The other board members, mostly Elizabeth's carefully cultivated allies, nodded in agreement. They saw what they wanted to see, the competent older sister cleaning up after her irresponsible younger brother. If only they knew. David, Elizabeth continued, not bothering to hide her smirk. You should leave now. Security will escort you out. 2 guards appeared behind my chair. I could feel the pity in their glances. They'd known me since I was a kid running through these halls, learning the business at our father's knee. Now they were about to escort me out like a common trespasser. Actually, I said, opening my laptop, I think we should review some interesting transactions I've discovered first. Elizabeth's perfectly maintained composure flickered for just a moment. There's nothing to review. The share transfer documents are clear. While you were in the hospital. Ah yes, my 3-month stay in the hospital, I interrupted softly. When I was fighting for my life after that mysterious car accident, the perfect time to arrange a share transfer, wouldn't you say? The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. I looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. Would anyone like to know what I was doing before that accident? What I discovered in our company's books. This is ridiculous, Elizabeth snapped, but I could see the fear beginning to creep into her eyes. Security, remove him. Touch me, I said to the guards without looking back, and the SEC gets an email containing everything I found, including the real reason behind Dad's sudden retirement last year. The guards hesitated. Elizabeth's face went pale. But let me back up, to understand how we got here, how the Anderson siblings' rivalry turned into corporate warfare. You need to know what happened 6 months ago, when I first noticed something wrong with our company's numbers. I'd always been the more detail-oriented sibling. While Elizabeth focused on networking and climbing the corporate ladder, I'd immersed myself in the actual operations of Anderson Financial. Every spreadsheet, every audit, every transaction. I knew our business inside and out. It started with a discrepancy in our Asian market investments, a series of trades that didn't quite add up, profits that appeared too good to be true. Most people would have written it off as exceptional performance. But I'd learned from our father that in finance, if something seems too good to be true, it usually is. You're being paranoid, David, Elizabeth had said when I first raised concerns. The Asian division is doing brilliantly, just because you can't match their performance in your sectors. But I kept digging, late nights in the office, weekends poring over transaction records. The deeper I looked, the more I found. Not just accounting irregularities, but systematic fraud. Money laundering for certain clients. Tax evasion schemes disguised as investment strategies, and at the center of it all, a name that appeared too often to be coincidence. Elizabeth Anderson. I confronted our father first, showing him the evidence I'd gathered. His reaction stunned me. Leave it alone, son, he'd said, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. Some stones are better left unturned. Dad, this is serious. Elizabeth is using our company for. I know. His interruption had been sharp, painful. Why do you think I'm retiring? The implications hit me like a physical blow. You know, you've known all along. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Your sister, she has a way of making things happen. Results that keep shareholders happy. Methods that, it's better not to look too closely. It's fraud, Dad, money laundering. Maybe worse. It's business, he'd replied warily, the kind that keeps hundreds of people employed, that funds pensions, that maintains our family's position. I'd left his office that day with my world shaken. The father I'd idolized, the moral compass who'd taught me about business ethics, was choosing to look the other way. But I couldn't. For the next month, I gathered evidence, created backups, established secure channels with regulatory authorities. I was careful, or so I thought. Then came the accident, a brake failure on a mountain road. 3 months in the hospital fighting for my life, and while I was unconscious, Elizabeth moved. The share transfer documents looked perfect. My signature, witnesses, notarization, all technically flawless, except I'd never signed them. never agreed to sell my 30% stake in our family's company to my sister for a fraction of its value. By the time I was conscious enough to protest, it was too late. Elizabeth controlled 67% of Anderson Financial. Our father had mysteriously decided to enjoy his retirement in a villa in Spain, conveniently unreachable. The old David Anderson, the trusting younger brother who believed in playing by the rules, died in that hospital room. The man who emerged was different, quieter, more patient. For 2 months after my release, I played the part they expected, the defeated sibling stripped of his birthright, nursing his wounds in exile. I sold my penthouse, moved into a modest apartment, started making noise about exploring other opportunities. Elizabeth relaxed. Her perfect coupe seemed complete. But she'd forgotten something crucial about me. Something our father used to say, David sees the details others miss. And in finance, the devil isn't just in the details, he lives there. While everyone thought I was licking my wounds, I was building my case. Every transaction Elizabeth had ever touched, every client she'd brought in, every deal that seemed too good to be true. And I found patterns, connections, a web of financial manipulation that went far beyond what I'd initially discovered. The evidence currently stored on my laptop would destroy not just Elizabeth's career, but the careers of half the people in this boardroom. The only question was who would see it first, the board or the federal authorities. Now, sitting at the end of that mahogany table, watching my sister's composure crack, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Would anyone like to see what I found? I asked the room quietly, or should we discuss how this plays out? Elizabeth's lawyer started to speak, but she silenced him with a sharp gesture. She knew me well enough to recognize the tone in my voice. The same tone I used when we were kids, and I caught her in a lie. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled, thinking of all the nights I'd spent building my case, of the pain during physical therapy, of our father's betrayal. Want? Dear sister, I don't want anything. I opened my laptop screen. I just think it's time for the truth to come out. All of it. And then I began to show them exactly what I'd discovered. The boardroom's tension could have been cut with a knife as I connected my laptop to the presentation screen. Elizabeth remained frozen in her chair, her usual confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. Let's start with the Preston Holdings acquisition. I began, pulling up a series of transaction records. On paper, it looked like a masterful deal. Elizabeth acquired a $500 million company for just $300 million. The board celebrated her negotiating skills. I clicked to the next slide. But here's what really happened. Preston Holdings was never worth $500 million. The valuation was artificially inflated through a series of fake contracts and phantom clients, all created by shell companies that coincidentally traced back to a certain law firm in the Cayman Islands. This is nonsense, Elizabeth interrupted, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? I pulled up another document. This is the registration paperwork for Ocean Vista Limited, the main shell company. Notice the founding partner's signature. Look familiar, Elizabeth? She went pale. It was her signature, carefully disguised but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Preston Holdings was worth barely $100 million, I continued. But Elizabeth arranged for Anderson Financial to pay $300 million, with the excess $200 million flowing through those shell companies and back to, well, let's see where the money went. The next series of slides showed a complex web of international transfers, each carefully structured to avoid detection. By the time I finished tracing the money flow, several board members looked physically ill. My God, whispered Henry Blackwood, our oldest board member. How long has this been going on? 5 years, I replied, since Elizabeth became CEO. But it gets better. Should we talk about the Asian market miracle next? Or perhaps the real reason behind Dad's sudden retirement? Stop. Elizabeth's voice was barely audible. Please. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The perfectly tailored suit, the expensive jewelry, the careful makeup. All part of the image she'd crafted of the brilliant CEO, the financial wizard who could do no wrong. Why? I asked simply. Why wasn't legitimate success enough? You don't understand, she hissed. The pressure, the expectations. Do you know what it's like being a woman in this industry? Having to be twice as good, twice as successful. So you decided to cheat, to steal, to try to kill me when I got too close to the truth. The boardroom erupted in gasps. Elizabeth's face went from pale to ashen. That's right, I continued, my voice hardening. The brake lines in my car didn't just fail spontaneously. I have the mechanic's testimony and the security footage showing who visited the parking garage the night before my accident. You can't prove that, Elizabeth whispered, but we both knew I could. I turned to address the board directly. While I was in the hospital, fighting for my life, my dear sister arranged to have my shares transferred to her control. The signatures are forgeries, the witnesses were bribed, and I have proof of all of it. What do you want? Henry Blackwood asked, his voice heavy with the weight of betrayal. The authorities should be here any minute. I finished for him. I contacted the SEC and FBI last week. They've been building their case independently, verifying everything I discovered. As if on cue, the boardroom doors opened. Federal agents streamed in, led by a stern-faced woman in a dark suit. Elizabeth Anderson, she announced. I'm Special Agent Sarah Martinez. We have some questions about your financial dealings. What followed was a blur of activity. Elizabeth was led away in handcuffs, her lawyer frantically making calls. Board members were served with subpoenas. The company's servers were seized. But before Elizabeth reached the door, she turned back to me. You've destroyed everything, she said bitterly. The company, the family name. No, I corrected her quietly. You did that. I'm just bringing back the truth. Hours later, after the agents had finished their initial sweep, I sat alone in my father's old office. The sun was setting over Boston Harbor, casting long shadows across the space where I'd spent so much of my childhood. My phone buzzed. A message from Dad in Spain. Is it done? Yes, I replied. Elizabeth's been arrested. The truth is out. His response came quickly. I should have listened to you sooner. I'm sorry. I stared at those words for a long time, thinking about family, loyalty, and the true meaning of legacy. Then I began typing. Come home, Dad. We have a company to rebuild. The next few months were a whirlwind of change. Elizabeth pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges, accepting a 15-year sentence rather than face a public trial. Several board members resigned in disgrace. The company's stock took a heavy hit when the news broke. But something unexpected happened too. As we cleaned house and implemented new transparency measures, clients began returning. Many had suspected something wasn't quite right under Elizabeth's leadership, but hadn't known where to turn. I was named interim CEO, though I insisted on an independent board majority and external oversight. The lessons of power concentration were not lost on me. 1 year later, I sat in that same boardroom where the confrontation had taken place. The mahogany table still gleamed, the harbor painting still washed over us. But everything else had changed. Our father had returned from Spain, not as an executive but as an advisor, helping us rebuild trust with long-term clients. He was different now. Humbler, more willing to acknowledge past mistakes. You've done something remarkable, he told me after a particularly successful quarter. You've brought honor back to the Anderson name. Not just me, I replied. Everyone who chose truth over convenience, ethics over easy profits. The company's new slogan, displayed prominently in our lobby, read, Success through integrity. It wasn't just words. We'd implemented stringent oversight measures, established anonymous reporting channels, and created an independent ethics committee. Elizabeth's story became a cautionary tale in business schools, a case study in how the pressure to succeed at any cost can corrupt even the most promising executives. As for me, I kept the modest apartment, drove a reasonable car, and focused on rebuilding not just our company's wealth, but its soul. Late one evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Elizabeth, written from federal prison. Dear David, I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, to the company, to our family, to you. The hardest part isn't the prison sentence or the public disgrace. It's knowing that I became everything our parents once taught us to fight against. You were right. Legitimate success would have been enough. I just couldn't see it through my own ambition. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know you did the right thing. Elizabeth. I placed the letter in my desk drawer, next to the photo of our family from happier times. Then I turned back to my work, reviewing audit reports, checking compliance measures, ensuring that what happened under Elizabeth's leadership could never happen again. Because in the end, true success isn't measured in profit margins or stock prices. It's measured in the strength of our principles, in our willingness to stand for what's right, even when it costs us everything we thought we wanted. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't in destroying our enemies, but in rebuilding what they tried to corrupt. The Anderson Financial Group survived its darkest chapter, emerging stronger, more transparent, and more committed to its ethical foundations than ever before. Not because of complex financial strategies or aggressive acquisitions, but because one person refused to look the other way when confronted with wrongdoing. As I finally headed home that evening, I paused in the lobby to read the company's mission statement, newly etched in glass. In finance, numbers tell stories, but character reveals truth. Some stories, I've learned, are worth more than all the fraudulent profits in the world. And some truths, once revealed, can set entire families free. The envelope sat unopened on my kitchen table for 3 days after Grandpa Joe's funeral. Inside was his last gift to me, the deed to our family's old farm in West Texas. 200 acres of supposedly worthless land that had been in our family for 4 generations. My in-laws couldn't stop talking about what a burden it would be. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how my grandfather's worthless inheritance turned into a $50 million lesson in doing your homework before judging someone else's legacy. You should just sell it, my mother-in-law Margaret had said at the funeral reception, picking at her chicken salad with perfectly manicured nails. That old place hasn't produced anything worthwhile in decades. We'll take it off your hands for a fair price. I nodded politely, too grief-stricken to argue. Grandpa Joe had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. That dusty old farmhouse was where I'd learned to ride a horse, where I'd done my homework at the ancient kitchen table, where I'd listened to his stories about our family's history in the oil business before the wells ran dry in the 1960s. Really, Sarah? My husband Tom chimed in, ever eager to please his mother. It makes sense. The property taxes alone will eat us alive. And what are we going to do with a ranch 5 hours from Houston? I finally opened the envelope on a quiet Wednesday morning. Inside, along with the deed, was a handwritten letter in Grandpa Joe's shaky script. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I've finally gone to join your grandmother and your parents. Don't waste too many tears on me. I've lived a good long life, and I'm leaving you what might turn out to be the most valuable thing I own, if you're smart enough to look deeper than the surface. The farm's been in our family since your great-great-grandfather James Mitchell struck oil there in 1923. The wells ran dry years ago, or so everyone thinks, but old James was cleverer than people gave him credit for. He knew something about that land that even my father never figured out. In my desk drawer at the farm, you'll find a red leather book. It's got all the answers you need if you take the time to really study it. Don't let anyone pressure you into selling until you've read every page. Love always, Grandpa Joe. B.S. Don't trust the Robinson brothers. They've been sniffing around the property for years, and there's a reason why. I drove out to the farm that weekend, ignoring Tom's complaints about wasting gas. The old house stood just as I remembered it. Weathered white clapboard, wrap-around porch with a creaky swing, ancient oak tree shading the west side. The key was still hidden in the fake rock by the back door. Inside, everything was covered in dust sheets. The furniture we'd moved out when Grandpa Joe went into the nursing home 2 years ago left ghost-like impressions on the wooden floors. I made my way to his study, where the massive oak desk still dominated the room. The red leather book was exactly where he said it would be, along with a stack of old maps, geological surveys, and what looked like original land grant documents from the 1920s. I settled into his old leather chair and began to read. 4 hours later, my hands were shaking as I closed the book. If what I was seeing was correct, Grandpa Joe and great-great-grandpa James had left me something far more valuable than anyone suspected. My phone buzzed. Another text from Tom. Mom wants to know if you thought about her offer. $50,000 is more than fair for that old place. I smiled, thinking about what I just learned. The original oil wells on the property had indeed run dry, but they had only tapped the upper layer of deposits. The geological surveys in the Red Book, updated secretly by Grandpa Joe just 5 years ago, showed massive untapped reserves in deeper formations that could only be reached with modern drilling technology. But that wasn't even the most valuable part. The original mineral rights agreement, which everyone thought had expired in the 1970s, had actually been renewed and expanded by Grandpa Joe through a complex series of legal maneuvers. The rights covered not just our 200 acres, but a vast tract of surrounding land, over 2,000 acres in total. The Robinson brothers, who owned the neighboring ranch, had been trying to buy our property for years. Now I understood why. They discovered the deeper oil deposits and had been quietly buying up surrounding properties. But without our mineral rights, they couldn't drill. I was still processing this information when another text came through, this time from Margaret. Coming over for dinner tonight. Need to discuss the farm situation. Perfect timing. I'd already scheduled a meeting with BlackRock Oil for Monday morning. Their preliminary estimates of the deposits, based on the surveys I'd found, were staggering. But tonight's dinner would be interesting for other reasons. I arrived at Tom and Margaret's sprawling River Oaks mansion at exactly 7:00 p.m. The whole family was there, Tom's sisters Amanda and Beth with their husbands, his father George looking uncomfortable in his smoking jacket, and Margaret holding court in her designer dress and diamonds. "Sarah, darling," she cooed as I walked in, "we've been so worried about you, rattling around that old farmhouse by yourself. Have you given any thought to our offer?" I smiled, accepting a glass of wine. "Actually, I have. But first, tell me why you're so interested in the property." "Pure charity," she replied smoothly. "We hate to see you burdened with that worthless land. The taxes, the upkeep, it's really not something someone of your background should have to deal with." My background. She never let me forget that I'd grown up on that farm, that I'd attended state school on a scholarship while Tom had gone to Yale. That I was, in her eyes, perpetually inferior. "The Robinsons stopped by yesterday," Tom added. "They're willing to go to $75,000. Really, Sarah, you should consider it." I took a slow sip of wine. The Robinsons. Interesting. Have they mentioned anything about their recent geological surveys? The room got very quiet. Margaret's perfectly Botox forehead tried to furrow. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully. "No. That's odd, because they've spent quite a bit of money surveying the area. They seem very interested in what's about 5,000 feet below the surface." Tom's father, George, suddenly started coughing. He'd made his money in oil, back in the day. He knew exactly what I was talking about. "Now, Sarah," Margaret began, her voice taking on that condescending tone I'd grown to hate, "you really shouldn't go filling your head with nonsense. That land was played out decades ago. Everyone knows that." I pulled out my phone and pulled up the email I'd received that afternoon from BlackRock Oil. "Everyone might need to revise their assumptions. Would you like to know what they're offering for just the mineral rights?" "This is ridiculous," Tom burst out. "Mother trying to help you, and you're spinning fairy tales about oil wells." I stood up, smoothing my dress. "The meeting's on Monday at 10 a.m. You're welcome to attend, Tom. After all, as my husband, you should be there when they present their final offer. Though you might want to sit down when they get to the number of zeros." "How dare you?" Margaret sputtered. "After all we've done for you." "All you've done," I interrupted quietly, "is treat me like a charity case to married above her station. But Grandpa Joe taught me something valuable. Never judge a book by its cover, or a farm by its surface." I walked to the door, then turned back. "Oh, and Margaret, that $50,000 offer, you might want to add a few zeros. After Monday, the price is going up significantly." The last thing I saw as I walked out was George's face, white as a sheet, as he finally understood exactly what he'd almost let slip through his fingers. The real fun would begin Monday morning. Monday morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect Texas day for changing lives. I arrived at BlackRock Oil's downtown Houston offices at 9:45 a.m., dressed in my best suit, not the outlet mall bargains Margaret always criticized, but a tailored Armani I'd bought specially for this meeting. Sometimes appearances matter. The conference room windows offered a spectacular view of the city skyline. I sat calmly reviewing my documents while waiting for the others to arrive. Right on cue, at 9:55, Tom burst in with Margaret and George in tow. "This is completely unnecessary," Margaret declared, smoothing her designer dress. "I've already spoken to our attorney about contesting the inheritance." "That won't be necessary, Mrs. Carter," a new voice interrupted. James Davidson, CEO of BlackRock Oil, walked in flanked by his executive team. "We've thoroughly reviewed the ownership documents. Ms. Mitchell's claim to both the property and mineral rights is ironclad. I suppressed a smile as Margaret's face went through several interesting color changes. Tom just looked confused, while George, ever the wellman, was studying Davidson with growing comprehension. "Shall we begin?" Davidson suggested, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Ms. Mitchell, we've completed our preliminary surveys based on the data you provided. Would you like me to share the results with your family?" "Please do," I said quietly. "I think I'll find it enlightening." Davidson nodded to his chief geologist, who pulled up a complex 3D imaging display of the land beneath my farm. "What you're looking at," he explained, "is one of the largest untapped oil deposits we've discovered in Texas in the last decade. Conservative estimates put the recoverable reserves at over 100 million barrels." The room went deadly quiet. George let out a low whistle. He knew exactly what those numbers meant. But the wells ran dry years ago," Tom protested weakly. "The surface wells, yes," the geologist agreed. "But your wife's great-great-grandfather was quite clever. He suspected the existence of deeper deposits but lacked the technology to reach them. The original wells were essentially a smokescreen, allowing him to secure mineral rights to a much larger area, while everyone thought the land was worthless." I pulled out Grandpa Joe's red leather book. He documented everything in here. The geological formations, the legal strategies, even the long-term plan. My grandfather updated the surveys and quietly renewed the rights every decade, waiting for drilling technology to catch up with his great-grandfather's vision. "The mineral rights," George said slowly, "how far do they extend?" Davidson smiled. "That's the truly brilliant part. The original agreement covers not just the Mitchell farm, but a 2,000-acre radius, including, I believe, the land recently purchased by the Robinson brothers." Margaret's perfectly lined lips formed a smile of shock. The Robinsons had spent millions buying up surrounding properties, never realizing that without my mineral rights, their investments were virtually worthless. "Our initial offer," Davidson continued, sliding a folder across the table, "is $50 million for a 30% stake in the development rights, with an additional 15% of ongoing production royalties." Tom actually fell back in his chair. Margaret grabbed the folder with trembling hands, her eyes widening as she read the details. "Of course," Davidson added, "the Robinsons have also made inquiries, but we prefer to work with the actual rights holder." He smiled at me. "Your grandfather spoke very highly of you, Ms. Mitchell. He mentioned you had a degree in geological engineering." Now it was my turn to be surprised. "You knew my grandfather?" We had several interesting conversations over the years. He wanted to make sure we'd be ready to move when the time was right. He was quite insistent that we wait until after certain events had played out. I felt tears threatening. Even from beyond the grave, Grandpa Joe had been looking out for me, making sure I'd have allies when the truth came out. "This is absurd," Margaret suddenly burst out. "She can't possibly manage something of this magnitude." Tom, as her husband. "Actually," I interrupted, "according to Texas inheritance law and the specific terms of my grandfather's will, the property and mineral rights are mine alone. Tom has no legal claim to them." I turned to my husband, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. Though we should probably discuss that, along with some other aspects of our relationship. The next few hours were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and increasingly desperate attempts by Margaret to regain control of the situation. But the documentation was perfect. Grandpa Joe and his father before him had made sure of that. By the end of the day, I had signed a preliminary agreement with BlackRock, filed for divorce from Tom, and begun the process of relocating back to the farm. The look on Margaret's face when she realized she'd spent years mocking what would become a billion-dollar property was almost worth all the humiliation she put me through. Almost. The aftermath was everything you might expect. Tom alternated between begging forgiveness and threatening lawsuits. Margaret had to be escorted from my office at BlackRock when she showed up demanding to be cut in on the deal. The Robinsons tried to contest the mineral rights but quickly backed down when their lawyers reviewed the documentation. I moved back to the farm that weekend. The house needed work, but that was fine. I had plans for it. Big plans. 1 month after the BlackRock meeting, I hosted a dinner party. The old dining room had been beautifully restored, the antique table polished to a mirror shine. My guests included James Davidson, his wife, and several key members of the development team. We were celebrating the first successful test well. As we sat down to dinner, Davidson raised his glass. To Sarah Mitchell, he said, and to Joe Mitchell, who knew exactly what he was doing when he left his legacy in her hands. Later that evening, as I sat on the porch swing watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I opened Grandpa Joe's red book again. A loose page fell out, one I somehow hadn't noticed before. The handwriting was shaky but clear. Sarah. By now you've discovered what the land is really worth. But that's not the most valuable thing I'm leaving you. The real inheritance is the lesson. Never let anyone tell you what you're worth. Your great-great-grandfather knew it when everyone thought you was crazy for buying this worthless land. I knew it when I watched you grow up into someone who could handle this responsibility. And now you know it too. They'll try to take it from you, of course. The Robinsons, the in-laws, maybe even Tom. But you're a Mitchell. We don't give up what's ours, and we don't let others define our worth. Make it count, sweetheart. Love, Grandpa Joe. 6 months later, the first production well went online. Standing at the site, watching the machinery pump liquid gold from deep beneath the earth, I thought about worth. The worth of land, of family legacy, of self-respect. Margaret still lives in River Oaks, though she's been notably absent from social events since the story broke. Tom moved to California with his new girlfriend. The Robinsons sold their properties at a loss and retired to Florida. And me, I split my time between Houston, where I oversee our partnership with BlackRock, and the farm, which I've restored to its former glory. The house is filled with light and life again, just as Grandpa Joe would have wanted. Last week, I hosted a group of female engineering students from Texas A&M, showing them around the operation and sharing what I've learned about the oil business and about life. The land looks pretty ordinary, one of them commented, gazing out over the seemingly empty plains. I smiled, remembering another time someone had judged by appearances. That's the thing about worth, I told her. Sometimes you have to dig deep to find it, but it's always there, waiting to be discovered. The Mitchell farm is now the centerpiece of one of the most productive oil developments in Texas. The initial wells exceeded even BlackRock's optimistic projections, and our partnership has expanded to cover the entire mineral rights area. But the real story isn't about oil or money. It's about legacy, about seeing beyond the surface, about standing up to those who would define your worth by their own limited vision. Every morning, I have coffee on the porch swing, watching the sun rise over land that 4 generations of Mitchells loved and protected. The oil pumps work quietly in the distance, turning Grandpa Joe's faith into reality. On my office wall hangs a simple frame containing a check for $50,000, Margaret's generous offer for the farm. Next to it is a recent financial statement showing the property's current value. The difference between those numbers isn't just about money. It's about the price of underestimating someone's worth. Sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear Grandpa Joe laughing. The ancient brass bell above the door chimed one last time as my cousins strode out of Harrison's Antiquities and Curiosities, their laughter echoing off the cramped shelves of what was now my inheritance. I stood alone in the dimly lit shop, surrounded by what they'd called worthless junk, my Uncle Theodore's lifetime collection of antiques and artifacts. Have fun with your pile of dust, Sophie. Jennifer's voice carried through the door. While you're cleaning, we'll be renovating the mansion. I ran my fingers along a nearby mahogany display case, leaving trails in the dust. At 32, I was the black sheep of the Harrison family, the one who'd chosen to study archaeology instead of business, who'd spent years on digs while my cousins climbed corporate ladders. Now, Uncle Theo's death had brought us all back to Boston, and his will had shocked everyone. To my beloved niece, Sophie Harrison, I leave my antique shop and all its contents, the lawyer had read yesterday, while my aunts and cousins sat in stunned silence. To Jennifer and Michael Harrison, I leave the family mansion and its grounds, along with my liquid assets. The monetary difference was staggering. The mansion alone was worth millions, not counting Uncle Theo's substantial bank accounts. The shop? It had been struggling for years, barely breaking even. My cousins thought Uncle Theo was punishing me with this gift, but they didn't know Uncle Theo like I did. I remembered the summer afternoons I'd spent here as a child, listening to Uncle Theo's stories about each artifact. He taught me to see beyond the surface, to understand that value wasn't always measured in dollars and cents. Every object has a story, he'd say, his eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. You just have to know how to read it. Now, standing in the fading afternoon light, I could almost hear his voice among the shadowed shelves. The shop was exactly as he'd left it, a maze of display cases and wooden cabinets, filled with everything from Victorian silverware to ancient Egyptian scarabs, reproductions, of course, or so we'd always thought. I made my way to his office at the back of the shop, navigating the narrow aisles with practiced ease. The small room was a testament to organized chaos. Books stacked in precarious towers, maps covering every inch of wall space, and his beloved roll-top desk dominating the corner. That's when I noticed something odd. The ancient Persian rug, the one Uncle Theo had always said was his most valuable possession, was slightly askew. In 20 years of visiting this office, I'd never seen that rug out of place. Uncle Theo had been almost obsessive about its positioning. Kneeling down, I rolled back the heavy fabric. There, carved into the wooden floorboard, was a small symbol. A circle within a square, exactly like the pendant Uncle Theo had always worn. The one that had mysteriously disappeared after his death. My heart began to race. Uncle Theo had been more than just an antique dealer. He'd been a scholar, a collector of mysteries, and I'd always suspected something more. His stories had often hinted at secret societies and hidden treasures, tales I dismissed as flights of fancy. But now, I ran my fingers over the carved symbol, remembering something he told me years ago. Sometimes, Sophie, the greatest treasures are hidden in plain sight. You just need the right key to see them. The key, the strange brass key he'd left me in his will, along with a cryptic note I hadn't yet opened. I'd assumed it was to the shop's front door, but now, I pulled both items from my bag, the ornate key with its unusual teeth, and the sealed envelope with my name written in Uncle Theo's elegant hand. The paper was thick, expensive, with that same circle and square symbol watermarked in the corner. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, then two things have happened. I've left this world for the next great adventure, and you found the mark beneath the Persian rug. I always knew you would. You have the gift, the ability to see what others miss. What I'm about to tell you must remain secret. Your cousins, your aunts, the entire family, they cannot know. Not yet. The shop isn't just a shop, Sophie. It's a gateway, a repository of secrets that go back centuries. The Antiquarian Guild has protected these secrets for generations, and now that responsibility passes to you. But beware, there are those who would kill for what lies hidden here. Trust no one until you've seen the truth for yourself. Use the key, follow the signs, and remember what I taught you about reading the stories in objects. The first step is behind my bookshelf, the one with the treatise on Mediterranean pottery. The key will fit a lock you cannot see until you know where to look. All my love and all my trust, Uncle Theo. P.S. If Jennifer and Michael are being their usual charming selves about the inheritance, don't let it bother you. They have no idea what they've missed. I read the letter 3 times, my mind spinning. The Antiquarian Guild, hidden secrets. It sounded impossible, like something from a movie. But Uncle Theo had never been one for practical jokes, and that symbol. Standing up, I moved to the bookshelf he'd mentioned. It looked ordinary enough, old volumes on pottery, archaeology, and art history. But when I ran my fingers along the edges, I felt something. A slight irregularity in the wooden frame, right at eye level. Looking closer, I noticed tiny marks carved into the wood, so faint they were nearly invisible. They formed a pattern similar to the one on the floor, but more complex. In the center was a small depression that looked like. My hands shaking, I inserted the brass key. It fit perfectly. But before I could turn it, I heard voices outside the shop. Loud, angry voices. Through the office window, I saw 3 men in dark suits examining the shop's facade. They weren't family, and they definitely weren't customers. The old man's dead, one said, his voice muffled through the glass. If it's here, now's our chance. I froze, the key still in the lock. Uncle Theo's warning echoed in my mind. There are those who would kill for what lies hidden here. The bell above the shop door chimed. They were inside. I had seconds to decide, turn the key and step into whatever mystery Uncle Theo had left for me, or face the men who were even now making their way through the shop. The key turned silently in the lock. and everything I thought I knew about Uncle Theo, about my inheritance, about reality itself, was about to change forever. Because what I found behind that bookshelf would not only solve a centuries-old mystery but would also put me in the crosshairs of people far more dangerous than my spoiled cousins. People who would stop at nothing to claim what Uncle Theo had protected for so long. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened next, you need to know about the summer I turned 12, when Uncle Theo first showed me the secret language of symbols hidden in everyday objects. When he first hinted at the true purpose of his little antique shop. And most importantly, you need to know about the ancient society that had been watching our family for generations, waiting for someone like me to finally unlock the truth. The bookshelf swung silently inward, revealing a narrow passage that shouldn't have existed in a building I thought I knew by heart. Behind me, heavy footsteps approached the office. I slipped through the opening, pulling the shelf closed just as shadows appeared under the office door. The passage was pitch black for a moment before soft lights activated along the floor, revealing a metal staircase descending into the earth. The air was cool and dry, carrying a faint scent of old paper and something else. Something ancient. Above, I heard muffled voices in Uncle Theo's office. Search everything. The old man must have left some clue about the collection's location. I descended the stairs as quietly as possible, counting the steps. 27. Uncle Theo's favorite number. At the bottom, I found myself in a room that defied belief. It was vast, far larger than the shop's foundation should have allowed. Climate-controlled glass cases lined the walls, filled with artifacts that made my archaeological training scream in disbelief. These weren't the reproductions we displayed upstairs. These were real. A perfectly preserved Greek amphora from the 5th century BCE. A complete set of samurai armor that predated the Kamakura period. Celtic torques that still gleamed with their original gold. And in the center of the room, a massive wooden table covered in maps, documents, and a state-of-the-art computer system that hummed quietly. "Oh, Uncle Theo," I whispered, "what were you really doing all these years?" On the table lay a leather-bound journal, recently used. I recognized Uncle Theo's handwriting. Final entry. They're getting closer. The Brotherhood thinks the collection is just artifacts, but they don't understand its true purpose. Sophie will figure it out. She has the gift, just like her grandmother did. The pattern in the Byzantine mosaic will lead her to. The entry ended abruptly. Next to the journal sat an old photograph I'd never seen before. Uncle Theo, decades younger, standing with a group of distinguished-looking people in front of an ancient temple. They all wore pendants with a circle and square symbol. A loud crash echoed from upstairs. They were tearing the office apart. I quickly scanned the room, looking for anything that might explain what I'd stumbled into. My eyes landed on a Byzantine mosaic fragment mounted on the wall. The one mentioned in Uncle Theo's final entry. Unlike the other artifacts, this piece seemed wrong somehow. The pattern didn't follow traditional Byzantine designs. Drawing on my training, I studied the mosaic's geometry. The tiles formed repeating patterns that seemed random at first, but as I looked closer, I realized they were a code. Numbers and letters hidden in plain sight using an ancient cipher system I'd studied during my doctorate. When translated, they read, "The collection guards the gate. The gate guards the truth. In unity lies the key to both." Below the mosaic sat an ancient wooden chest, its surface carved with the same circle and square symbol. Unlike everything else in the room, this chest had gathered dust, as if Uncle Theo had wanted it to appear unremarkable. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside lay hundreds of letters, documents, and photographs dating back centuries. Each bore the symbol of what I now realized must be the Antiquarian Guild. As I read through them, an incredible story emerged. The Guild wasn't just a society of collectors. They were guardians protecting artifacts that proved an alternative history of human civilization. Evidence of advanced ancient knowledge that could revolutionize our understanding of the past, and possibly threaten the foundations of modern power structures. A sealed envelope addressed to me sat at the bottom of the chest. Inside was a USB drive and another note from Uncle Theo. "Sophie, if you're reading this, you found the true inheritance. The collection isn't just artifacts, it's proof. Proof that human civilization is far older and more advanced than we've been led to believe. Proof that certain technologies and knowledge have been rediscovered and lost multiple times throughout history. The Brotherhood of the New Dawn wants to use these artifacts to control this knowledge, to maintain their power over history itself. The Guild has fought them for centuries, preserving the truth until humanity is ready for it. Your cousins got the mansion because that's what they value, material wealth. But you, my dear, have inherited something far more precious, the truth and the responsibility to protect it. The USB drive contains everything you need: accounts, contacts, security protocols. The Guild will reach out once you've processed this information. Trust them, but verify everything. Remember what I taught you about questioning even the most basic assumptions. Your grandmother was one of our greatest members before she disappeared. Now you know why I spent so much time training you, preparing you for this moment. The gift runs in our blood, the ability to see patterns others miss, to read the stories hidden in ancient things. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this in person. If you're reading this, it means the Brotherhood finally caught up with me. But they don't know about you. Use that advantage wisely. All my love, Uncle Theo. P.S. Check the inventory list carefully. Some of our most important pieces are disguised as worthless reproductions in the shop above. Right under their noses, just where they'd never think to look. Footsteps on the metal stairs interrupted my reading. But these were different from the heavy tread of the men searching upstairs. These steps were deliberate, confident. Ms. Harrison. A woman's voice called softly. I'm Diana Chen, Guild Security. We need to move quickly. The Brotherhood's team upstairs just called for backup. I turned to find an elegant Asian woman in her 50s, dressed like a museum curator but moving like someone with military training. She wore the Guild's pendant openly now. How did you? I began. Your uncle activated the Guild's protocols the day before he died. We've been watching, waiting to see if you'd find your way down here. She gestured to the chest. Do you understand what you've inherited? I'm starting to, I replied, thinking of all the times Uncle Theo had tested me, trained me without my knowing it. It's not just artifacts, is it? It's responsibility, knowledge, and power, Diana added gravely. Power that some would kill to control. The Brotherhood thinks these artifacts are the treasure, but your uncle understood the real value is in the knowledge they represent. Knowledge that could change everything or destroy everything in the wrong hands. More footsteps above. Angry voices. They're pulling up the floorboards, Diana said tensely. We have about 3 minutes before they find the entrance. We need to move the critical pieces now. Are you ready to accept your inheritance, Ms. Harrison? Really accept it. I looked around the room, at the artifacts that rewrote history, at Uncle Theo's lifetime of work, at the responsibility he prepared me for without my knowing it. I thought of my cousins up in their mansion, counting their money, having no idea of the real treasure they'd missed. Yes, I said firmly. Where do we start? The next hour was a blur of activity as Diana's team evacuated key pieces through a secondary tunnel I'd never known existed. I memorized security protocols, passwords, and contact procedures. The Brotherhood found the entrance eventually, but by then we'd vanished with the most important items, leaving them with a room full of convincing duplicates. Hours later, in a secure Guild facility, Diana finished briefing me on my new reality. Your uncle was one of our best, she said. He identified you as his successor years ago, but we had to be sure. Finding your way down there, decoding the mosaic, that was your final test. And if I failed? The Brotherhood would have found an empty room, and you would have inherited exactly what they think you did, a struggling antique shop. She smiled. But you didn't fail. Welcome to the Guild, Ms. Harrison. That was 6 months ago. The shop still stands, still selling reproductions to unsuspecting customers. My cousins still laugh about my worthless inheritance at family gatherings. Let them laugh. Because now I know the truth. About Uncle Theo, about our family's legacy, about history itself. Every day, I learn more from the collection, unlocking secrets hidden in plain sight. The Brotherhood is still searching, of course. They always will be, but they're looking in the wrong places, just as they always have. Because the real treasures aren't in secret rooms or hidden vaults. They're scattered throughout the shop above, disguised as worthless trinkets, telling their stories to anyone who knows how to read them. Uncle Theo taught me well. Value isn't always what it seems. Sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones others overlook. And sometimes, the most important inheritance isn't what you get, it's what you become. Last week, a young girl visited the shop with her parents. While they browsed the expensive items in the front, she lingered by a dusty shelf of reproductions, studying their patterns with unusual intensity. I watched her trace the hidden symbols none of her family could see, and I smiled. Uncle Theo would have liked her. In a few years, once she's ready, I'll start teaching her what he taught me. Because that's the real purpose of the collection, not just to preserve knowledge, but to pass it on to those who can understand its true value. After all, every object has a story. You just have to know how to read it. And some stories are worth more than all the mansions in the world.